Section 1. The Town That Time Forgot. Springfield's Impossible Reality. Settle in. Get comfortable. Pull the blanket a little closer, because what we are about to do together is take a long, slow, quiet walk through the strangest town in American television history. We are going to wander the streets of Springfield. We are going to sit on the curb outside the Quick E-Mart and watch the world go by. We are going to look at every house, every face, every cracked sidewalk and flickering streetlight, and we are going to ask the questions that nobody inside the town ever thinks to ask. And by the time we are done, you will understand Springfield in a way that most people never do. Not just as a cartoon. Not just as a comedy. But as a place, a real, breathing, impossible place with its own rules and its own secrets and its own quiet darkness humming beneath the surface of every joke. The Simpsons has been on the air since December 17th, 1989. That is not a typo. That is not an exaggeration. That is 36 years, over 780 episodes and counting. It is the longest-running American animated series in history. It is the longest-running scripted primetime show. It is the longest-running sitcom. It has outlasted presidencies and cultural movements and entire genres of television. It has been running so long that children who were born while it was already on the air have grown up, had children of their own, and those children are now old enough to watch the show. 3 generations of the same family have sat on different couches in different decades and watched the same opening credits roll. The same yellow faces. The same couch gag. The same nuclear power plant cooling towers puffing steam into the blue sky of an American town that somehow, impossibly, never changes. That is the first mystery of Springfield, and it is the one that every other mystery grows out of. Nothing changes. Nobody ages. Bart Simpson is still 10 years old. He has been 10 years old since before the internet existed. Since before most of the people watching this video were born. Lisa is still 8. Maggie is still a baby, still sucking on that same pacifier. Still staring at the world with those enormous, knowing eyes. Homer still wakes up every morning, drives to work at the same nuclear power plant, pushes the same buttons, or fails to push them, and comes home to the same yellow house on the same street in the same town that has been quietly refusing to move forward in time since the day it was first drawn into existence. Think about what that means in human terms. If you were 10 years old in 1989 when The Simpsons debuted, you are now in the real world, somewhere in your mid-40s. You have lived entire chapters of a life. You have had relationships and careers and disappointments and unexpected joys and mornings where everything was difficult and evenings where everything was fine. You have changed in ways so fundamental that if you could sit down with your 10-year-old self, the conversation would be strange and slightly uncomfortable and full of things that neither version of you could fully translate to the other. That is what 36 years does to a person. It makes you unrecognizable to who you were at the beginning of it. And Bart is still 10. Lisa is still 8. The children who were introduced to us as the most famous animated family in American television are still the same age as the day we met them. Wearing the same clothes, carrying the same school bags, riding the same bus to the same school every morning, coming home to the same house where the same dinner is being made in the same kitchen by the same mother who has been doing this, without aging a single day for longer than some entire countries have existed in their current form. The show has a technical term for what it does with its timeline. It is called a floating timeline, and it is a standard tool used by long-running animated programs. The basic logic is that the show's present is always the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025. When one aired in 1995, the characters were living in 1995. The year moves, the technology updates, the cultural references shift. But the characters do not move with the year. They remain frozen at their introductory ages while the calendar page keeps turning around them. It is a practical solution to a practical problem. If Bart aged at the same rate as real time, he would be in his 40s by now. If Homer and Marge aged at the same rate as real time, they would be elderly. The floating timeline keeps the show's fundamental dynamic intact by simply refusing to acknowledge that time passes for the characters even as it passes for the audience. Most people accept this. It is a convention. It is how these shows work. The Simpsons, Family Guy, Futurama before it aged its characters. You absorb the convention and you stop questioning it and you watch the show. This is sensible, and it is what the vast majority of viewers do. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has created fissures in the show's internal reality that are, at this point, genuinely remarkable in their scale. The backstory of Homer and Marge, which was rooted in the late 1970s and early 1980s when the show began, has been rewritten multiple times as the floating present has dragged the narrative context forward. Homer's and Marge's childhoods and adolescence and courtship have been placed in the 1970s. Then the 1980s, then the 1990s, then the early 2000s. Depending on when the flashback episode was made, their origin story has been told and retold at least 4 times, each version placing their formative years in a different decade. They were Vietnam-era teenagers. They were disco-era teenagers. They were grunge-era teenagers. They were millennial teenagers. The characters are the same. The love is the same. But the era keeps being revised because the floating timeline requires it and the show obliges. And here is the thing that is so easy to accept and so difficult to truly sit with. The world around Springfield has changed completely. The 1989 Springfield of the early episodes feels utterly different from the 2024 Springfield of the recent ones. The technology has updated, the cultural references have shifted, the stories have traveled to every corner of the world and every corner of the imagination. But the people inside Springfield have not changed at all. Their relationships are the same. Their houses look the same. Their faces look the same. The children are exactly as old as they were when we first met them. And none of them, not a single resident of this town, has ever stopped in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday and thought to themselves, wait a minute, something is wrong here. Something is deeply, fundamentally impossible. We're going to spend the next few hours exploring what that something might be. We're going to do it slowly. We're going to do it gently, the way you explore a strange old house at night, not trying to frighten anyone, just following the hallways wherever they go, opening doors and looking at what is inside, then softly closing them again and moving on. This is not a racing, breathless breakdown. This is a long, quiet walk. The kind of walk you take when you have nowhere to be and nowhere to hurry to, and the whole night stretches out ahead of you, soft and dark and full of interesting things. So, let us begin at the beginning. Let us begin with Springfield itself. The town of Springfield exists in a state of permanent, carefully maintained contradiction. It has mountains, and it has oceans. It has a desert, and it has a harbor. It has tropical weather, and it has blizzards. It borders, depending on which episode you are watching, the states of Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky simultaneously. It cannot actually do any of these things. No real town in America can be bordered by 4 states that do not touch each other, while also having ocean access, desert landscapes, and mountain ranges all within a reasonable drive of the same elementary school. And yet Springfield does all of this casually, without explanation, as if the geography of the town is simply whatever it needs to be for the story being told that particular week. The show's creator, Matt Groening, has spoken about this. In a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine, he explained that he named the town Springfield because it is one of the most common city names in America. Almost every state has a Springfield of some kind. He chose the name deliberately because he wanted the town to feel like it could be anywhere, like it belonged to everyone who watched it. Like no matter where you grew up, no matter what part of America you called home, you might recognize something in Springfield's streets and its stores and its angry, confused, loving, exhausted residents. And that is the official explanation. The surface-level answer. Springfield is everywhere because it was designed to feel that way. It is a universal American town built from pieces of every American town that has ever existed, stitched together into something that feels familiar even if you cannot quite say why. But there is a deeper reading. There is always a deeper reading in Springfield. When you have been watching the show for long enough, when you have been paying close attention to the details that accumulate across 780 episodes, the geographic impossibility of Springfield starts to feel less like a design choice and more like a symptom. The town cannot be located because the town exists outside of normal space. It cannot be pinned down on a map because it is not subject to the same physical laws as the places on maps. The mountains and the oceans and the deserts and the farmland and the harbor all exist in the same place. Because something in Springfield, something fundamental and invisible and never quite acknowledged out loud, has warped the space around it into something that should not be possible. That something has a name. Or rather, it has several names, several explanations, several theories that different people have developed over years and decades of close, careful attention to this show. We are going to explore all of them tonight. We are going to walk through each one slowly, turning it over in our hands, looking at the evidence from every angle, and then setting it down gently before picking up the next one. But before we get to the specific theories, let us spend a little more time in Springfield itself. Let us just walk around. Let us look at things. The Springfield that we know from the early seasons is a town with a clear and recognizable shape. There is Evergreen Terrace, the quiet residential street where the Simpson family lives in their 2-story yellow house. There is Springfield Elementary School, the low-slung, underfunded building where Bart and Lisa spend their days. There is Moe's Tavern, dark and slightly sticky, where Homer and his friends gather every evening to drink Duff beer and talk about nothing in particular. There is the Quick E-Mart, run by the endlessly patient and cheerful Apu, open at all hours, stocked with a particular kind of convenience store food that tastes better at midnight than it has any right to. There is the First Church of Springfield, where Ned Flanders sits in the front pew every Sunday, hands folded, eyes upward. There is the Springfield Town Hall, the police station, the Springfield General Hospital, the retirement home, the cemetery, the nuclear power plant. That last one sits on the edge of town. It dominates the skyline. 2 enormous cooling towers, perpetually steaming, visible from almost everywhere in Springfield on a clear day. The Springfield Nuclear Power Plant. Owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns, the oldest, wealthiest, and in many ways the most powerful man in town. The facility that provides electricity to every home and business in Springfield. The facility that has, according to at least one official inspection, 342 safety violations. The facility that has been leaking, according to decades of carefully observed canonical evidence, radioactive material into the water and air of the surrounding town for as long as anyone can remember. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We will spend a great deal of time on the power plant later. For now, let us just note that it is there, that it has always been there, that it is the first thing you see when you look at the Springfield skyline and the last thing you stop thinking about when you start to really look at this town. The residents of Springfield are, taken together, one of the most remarkable collections of fictional characters ever assembled for a single story. There are hundreds of them. Named, recurring, developed across years and decades of storytelling. You have Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie. The family at the center of everything. The gravitational core around which all of Springfield orbits. You have the neighbors, Ned and Maud and later Rod and Todd, the Flanderses, the good Christian family next door who represent everything the Simpsons are supposed to be but never quite manage. You have Homer's friends, Lenny and Carl and Barney, the regular patrons of Moe's Tavern, each one a different shade of working-class Springfield life. You have the professional figures, Principal Skinner who runs the elementary school with military precision and barely suppressed anxiety, Chief Wiggum who runs the police force with neither precision nor anxiety but rather a cheerful bovine incompetence. Dr. Hibbert, the family's physician who laughs at everything including things that are not funny. Sideshow Bob, the sophisticated, cultivated, perpetually thwarted villain who keeps trying to kill Bart and keeps failing in increasingly elaborate ways. And then there are the background characters. The faces you see in the crowd, the people who populate the edges of Springfield's world and give it its texture. Hans Molleman, the tiny, ancient, nearly blind man who exists primarily to suffer. Disco Stu, frozen in a decade that ended before most of Springfield was born. Comic book guy, the proprietor of the Android's Dungeon, whose contempt for everything and everyone around him is delivered with such precise, exhausted expertise that it becomes, paradoxically, its own form of love. These are the people of Springfield. These are the people who have been living in this impossible, unchanging town for 36 years without aging a day. And when you look at them closely, when you really look at them, you start to notice things that the show takes for granted and expects you to take for granted too. They are yellow. Every single one of them. Every native of Springfield has yellow skin. Not the pale yellow of someone who has been ill. Not the rich gold of someone with a deep tan. A flat, solid crayon yellow that exists in no human population anywhere on Earth. Visitors to Springfield look different. Guest characters, celebrities, people from outside the town, they are drawn with more natural skin tones. They look more like people. The Springfielders look like something else. Something that evolved in Springfield specifically, under conditions that do not exist anywhere else. They have 4 fingers on each hand. Not 5. 4. The show depicts this so consistently that you stop noticing after a while. The way you stop noticing the yellow skin, the way you stop noticing the impossibly shaped hair and the bulging eyes and the overbites that affect almost every adult character in town. You normalize it. You absorb it into your understanding of what a Springfield person looks like and you stop questioning it. But what if you did not stop questioning it? What if you kept looking? What if you followed that thread all the way to wherever it leads? Here is where we begin. Here is the question that sits underneath all the other questions. What happened to Springfield? Not as a cartoon, not as a piece of art with its own visual grammar and its own aesthetic rules. What happened to Springfield as a place? As a town full of people who eat and drink and breathe and live their lives within a very specific geographic and industrial context? What happened to them? There are several answers to that question. We're going to explore all of them tonight, one at a time, slowly and carefully, with all the time in the world. The first answer is the most visible one, the one that has been sitting right there in the Springfield skyline since the very first episode, steaming quietly against the blue cartoon sky. Patient and ancient and entirely unmoved by the fact that nobody seems to be looking directly at it. The nuclear power plant. But that story deserves its own section. its own long, careful walk through the evidence. So let us just sit with Springfield for a little while longer before we get there. Let us let the town settle around us like a familiar dream. The yellow houses, the wide streets, the sound of children playing somewhere in the middle distance, the distant thrum of machinery from the edge of town, where the cooling towers breathe their slow, steady steam into the endless American sky. Springfield is a town full of people who are asleep to what is happening around them. Not literally asleep, though we will explore a theory about that too, but asleep in the way that communities sometimes go asleep to uncomfortable truths. Asleep to the three-eyed fish in the river. Asleep to the billionaire who glows in the dark. Asleep to the fact that their children have never grown up, that their neighbors keep dying and coming back, that the same disasters keep happening and getting forgotten, that the world around them has changed completely while Springfield itself has stayed exactly the same. Tonight, we are not going to be asleep. Tonight, we are going to be awake in Springfield in the gentlest possible way. The way you are awake at 2 in the morning when the house is quiet and everything feels slightly more real and slightly more interesting than it does in the daytime. We're going to look at the things the show shows us and ask what they mean. We're going to follow the evidence wherever it goes, quietly, without hurry, without alarm. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let us take it one step at a time, one mystery at a time, one slow, careful breath at a time. Welcome to Springfield. Try not to drink the water. And that is the end of our opening section. If you are already comfortable and your eyes are getting heavy, that is exactly where you should be. Drop a comment with your time and location right now. It is always interesting to see where in the world people are listening from. And if this is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe. There is a lot more Springfield to explore tonight, and we are just getting started. Section 2. The Nuclear Conspiracy. How the power plant poisoned everything. Let us talk about the power plant. Let us talk about it the way you would talk about something that has been sitting in the corner of the room for so long that everyone has stopped noticing it, something that has become part of the furniture of everyday life, something that hums and breathes and quietly goes about its business while the people around it eat dinner and watch television and put their children to bed, entirely unaware of what is happening in that corner. The Springfield nuclear power plant has been part of the show since the very beginning. It appears in the opening credits of every single episode. We watch Homer drive his car away from it at the end of his shift, carrying a glowing green rod in his collar, oblivious to the fact that he is carrying radioactive material on his body. The rod falls out of his collar. He does not notice. He drives home. The rod tumbles out of the car in the driveway, and his foot lands on it as he walks inside. He still does not notice. And then he sits down on the couch with his family and the credits roll, and we all laugh and forget about the glowing green rod sitting on the driveway of 742 Evergreen Terrace. That is the tone the show has always used when discussing the nuclear power plant. Casual. Comedic. A little absurdist. The plant is a background fact of Springfield life, the way traffic is a background fact of life in any large city. You notice it, you navigate around it, you complain about it occasionally, and then you get on with your day. You do not ask what it is doing to you, but the evidence that the plant is doing something significant and pervasive and irreversible, has been building in the background of the show for 3.5 decades. And when you gather it all together, when you lay it out in order and look at the full picture, it is not subtle. It is not ambiguous. It is a story that the show has been telling you openly, directly, without any real attempt at concealment, banking on the fact that you will normalize it the same way Springfield's residents have. Let us start with the plant itself. The Springfield Nuclear Power Plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It provides essentially all of the electrical power for the entire town of Springfield. This means that every light, every appliance, every piece of machinery in the town is running on power generated by this facility. The town is completely dependent on it. There is no alternative power source. If the plant shut down, Springfield would go dark. The economy would collapse. Every business, every hospital, every home would lose power simultaneously. This dependency is not a minor detail. It is the foundation of Burns's power over the town, and we will come back to it. The safety record of the Springfield Nuclear Power Plant is, to put it gently, catastrophic. A surprise inspection by federal authorities found 342 safety violations. 342. For context, this is not like finding out a restaurant has a few fruit flies in the kitchen. This is an epic, systemic, comprehensive failure of safety standards across every aspect of the facility's operation. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code was $56 million. Burns refused to spend it, not because he could not afford it. Charles Montgomery Burns is a billionaire many times over. $56 million is, for him, the cost of an afternoon's entertainment. He refused, because spending that money would mean acknowledging that the violations existed. And acknowledging that the violations existed would mean someone would start asking questions. Questions like, how long have these violations been in place? And what have they done to the surrounding environment? And what have they done to the people living in that environment? Questions that Burns, with very good reason, did not want asked. The violations themselves are not trivial. The show depicts them across many episodes, often as background gags, sometimes as the central crisis of a story. Radioactive waste being dumped directly into Springfield's water supply. Radioactive waste being dumped onto children's playgrounds, including the playground at Springfield Elementary School where Bart and Lisa spend their days. Plutonium being used as a desk paperweight in someone's office. Cooling towers patched with chewing gum rather than repaired through any kind of structural intervention. Luminous rats running through the basement of the facility, glowing softly in the dark, their bodies lit from within by the material they have absorbed. And then there is the detail that the show drops almost in passing and never returns to. Human skeletons in the basement of the nuclear power plant. Not animal bones. Not props. Human skeletons found during an inspection in the basement of an active nuclear facility. The show presents this as a single moment, notes it, and moves on. Nobody asks who those people were. Nobody asks how they died. Nobody asks how long they had been there. The bones are observed and filed away under the same mental category as everything else in Springfield that should prompt urgent questions and somehow never does. Homer Simpson is the safety inspector at this facility. He has held this position for the entirety of his adult life. He is the person whose job description is to prevent the kinds of violations we just described. He is the last line of defense between the Springfield nuclear power plant and the town it supplies with electricity and, increasingly, with something else. Matt Groening, the show's creator, has stated that Homer Simpson has an IQ of 55. 55. This is a number that, on any standardized scale of cognitive function, places him in the range of significant intellectual disability. And this is before we account for the additional cognitive damage caused by the crayon that, as the show reveals in Season 12, has been lodged in Homer's brain since childhood, physically impeding the function of his prefrontal cortex and keeping his intelligence artificially suppressed below, even its already limited baseline. Homer, without the crayon, is not a genius, but he is a functioning, articulate, thoughtful person capable of understanding complex situations and making rational decisions. Homer with the crayon is the person we see every week. A man who falls asleep at his workstation, who eats donuts during meltdown alerts, who once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to see if it would grow larger in the radiation. That last one bears repeating. Homer Simpson threw a donut into an active nuclear reactor to see if the radiation would make it grow. He was curious. He was hungry. He was bored. He is the safety inspector. Now. The question that the radiation theory asks is not complicated. The question is simply this. If the plant has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's water supply and air and soil for decades, and if the animals in that environment, the fish in the river, the pets in the homes, the wildlife in the woods nearby, show visible signs of mutation, what has that same material done to the people? The first visible mutant in Springfield appears in Season 2, Blinky, the three-eyed fish. Blinky is pulled from a river near the power plant by a fisherman who is, as fishermen in Springfield tend to be, not particularly alarmed by what he has found, a fish with 3 eyes. Pulled from water downstream of a nuclear facility with hundreds of safety violations. The fish becomes national news within the show's universe. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky as a campaign centerpiece, arguing that Burns is poisoning the environment. Burns responds by appearing on television and eating Blinky himself, which is a fascinating choice and one that suggests a level of confidence in his own biological resilience that is, given what we know about his weekly treatments, entirely justified. The town watches Burns eat the three-eyed fish. The news cycle moves on. Nobody tests the water. Nobody conducts a follow-up study. Nobody asks the obvious question that any person who has been paying even minimal attention should immediately ask. If the fish have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people drinking the same water? The answer, the theory argues, is visible in every frame of the show. You just have to know what you are looking at. Homer Simpson has a skull shape that does not occur in normal human populations. He has bulging eyes, an extreme overbite, 4 fingers on each hand, and a body capable of absorbing physical trauma that would be fatal to any normally constituted human being. He has been shot, electrocuted, fallen from cliffs, been hit by multiple vehicles, survived multiple explosions, been struck by lightning, drowned, been launched from cannons, been crushed by heavy objects, and walked away from every single incident. Not because he is particularly brave or particularly resilient in any conventional sense, but because his body has been altered in ways that make it functionally almost indestructible. His healing rate is not human. His pain tolerance is not human. His ability to simply absorb catastrophic physical damage and continue functioning is not anything that a body operating according to normal biological rules should be able to do. Marge Simpson has the same bulging eyes, the same 4 fingers, and hair that defies every law of physics and gravity in existence, growing straight upward in a tower 3 feet high that she has maintained in exactly the same configuration for 36 years without product, without structural support, without any explanation whatsoever. Marge briefly worked at the Springfield nuclear power plant herself. She was exposed to the same facility, the same violations, the same ambient radiation. And all 3 of her children were born after both parents had been living in Springfield's contaminated environment for years. Bart, Lisa, and Maggie. All born in Springfield. All raised in Springfield. All drinking the same water, breathing the same air, eating the food grown in the same soil, all showing the same physical characteristics. The spiky hair that maintains its shape without any product. The overbites. The bulging eyes. The yellow skin. The 4 fingers, and each of them, in their own way, displaying qualities that go beyond ordinary human experience in either direction. Homer at one end of the spectrum, intellectually diminished, physically indestructible. Maggie at the other end, intellectually extraordinary, physically a baby. All of them, the theory argues, products of the same environmental cause. Here is the detail that makes this theory particularly compelling and particularly difficult to dismiss. When celebrities visit Springfield, when guest characters arrive from outside the town, they look different. Not slightly different. Fundamentally different. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes are closer to normal human size. Their features more closely resemble actual human anatomy. The show draws outsiders with different proportions than it draws Springfield residents. And the explanation that everybody accepts is that this is just the art style, that it is just how The Simpsons looks, and that guest characters are drawn in a more realistic style as a visual joke. But within the internal logic of the show's own universe, there is a visible, observable, consistent difference between people who live in Springfield and people who do not. The people inside the contamination zone look different from the people outside it. Every single time. Without exception for 36 years. The animals support this reading. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes as his owners, the same physical proportions that deviate from what a normal greyhound looks like. Blinky the fish had 3 eyes. The rats in the power plant basement glow. Springfield's wildlife is demonstrably, canonically, visibly altered by the plant's runoff. The show tells you this. It shows you the 3-eyed fish and explains directly that the radiation is doing this, and then it invites you to conclude that the same radiation has had 0 effect on the humans living in the same environment. The theory says this conclusion is not sustainable. Now let us talk about Mr. Burns, because Burns is both the cause of the contamination and the most direct evidence that radiation in this specific form has effects on biology that go far beyond what the characters acknowledge. In the Season 8 episode called The Springfield Files, Homer sees something in the woods near Springfield and believes it is an extraterrestrial creature. The entire town panics. FBI agents are called in to investigate. The episode builds to a dramatic reveal. And when the truth is finally disclosed, the creature Homer saw was not an alien from outer space. It was Mr. Burns. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so saturated with chemicals and radiation therapy, that it temporarily gives his entire body what the show describes as a healthy green glow. He wanders out of the treatment facility in a dazed, euphoric state, barely able to walk, glowing softly in the darkness of the Springfield woods like something from another world. Because that is what he has become. Not from another world exactly, but from another biological state, one that requires weekly maintenance to sustain, that collapses without intervention, that would kill him within 7 days if the treatment were missed. The implications of this are staggering, and the show presents them entirely without comment. Burns is not surviving through natural biological processes. He is being kept alive through artificial means. His body has been so fundamentally altered by its relationship to nuclear material, whether through direct exposure over a century of operating the plant, or through some earlier condition that the treatments manage and extend, that it cannot sustain itself without external intervention. He requires scheduled nuclear maintenance the way a normal human requires food and water. Miss a treatment, and Burns dies. It is that simple. The margin for error is 0. And here is the piece that connects Burns's personal biology to the town around him. Burns knows what radiation does to biological systems, because radiation is what keeps him alive. He has, by the logic of the theory, been studying and managing the effects of nuclear exposure on his own body for decades, perhaps for over a century. He has personal physicians. He has a private pharmaceutical division. He has the research infrastructure to synthesize experimental treatments. He understands the relationship between radiation and biology at an intimate, personal level that nobody else in Springfield can match. And he knows, therefore, with more precision and more certainty than anyone, exactly what the leaking plant is doing to the people downstream. He knows because his own body is an extreme version of what theirs are going through. He is keeping himself alive by carefully managing the same material that is unmanaged, degrading everyone around him. He has the antidote, essentially, and he is the only one taking it. Homer's continued employment at the plant, given all of this, looks different when you consider it through this lens. When German investors briefly purchased the plant, the first thing they did was fire Homer. The second thing they did was assess the cost of bringing the facility up to code, nearly went bankrupt from the estimate alone, and sold the plant back to Burns. Burns immediately rehired Homer. A competent safety inspector would have the plant shut down within weeks. Homer ensures that the violations continue, and nobody with the authority to stop them ever becomes aware of their full scope. Homer is not kept at his job despite his incompetence. He is kept at his job because of it. There is a deeper conspiracy still. The crayon in Homer's brain, discovered in season 12, was there from childhood. Homer had it removed briefly, and his intelligence skyrocketed. He became articulate, capable, aware. He could see Springfield for what it was. He could understand the architecture of his own situation in a way that the fog of the crayon had always prevented. It made him miserable. He saw the world clearly and found it unbearable. So he had the crayon put back in. He chose the fog. But the question the theory asks gently is this: how did a crayon end up lodged in a child's brain without anyone noticing? How did Homer go through his entire childhood, his entire adolescence, his entire adult life, visiting Springfield's doctors, getting checkups, and not one of them ever found a foreign object in his skull? Either every doctor in Springfield is comprehensively incompetent, which is possible and in keeping with the general level of professional functioning in the town, or someone knew it was there and chose not to remove it. And if the town's medical establishment is looking the other way, if the healthcare infrastructure of Springfield is as compromised as its safety infrastructure, if Burns's influence extends into the hospitals as well as the plant, then Homer's crayon is not an accident or an oversight. It is maintenance. The same kind of maintenance that Burns applies to his own body every week. Just in the opposite direction. The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about the Simpsons. It explains all of them. The yellow skin is a mutation effect. The 4 fingers are a mutation effect. The impossible hair is a mutation effect. The inability to age is a mutation effect at the cellular level. The physical indestructibility of characters like Homer is a mutation effect. The cognitive decline, the memory dysfunction, the way the whole town resets after every catastrophe and nobody remembers what happened, that is a chronic neurological effect of decades of radiation exposure. The brain damage is not incidental to Springfield's personality. It is the mechanism by which the town remains stable. A population too cognitively compromised by radiation to consistently form memories or make long-term plans or challenge the power structure that is poisoning them is a population that will never organize against that power structure. Springfield is not a quirky cartoon town. Springfield is a contamination zone. The residents are not eccentric. They are symptomatic, and the nuclear power plant that provides their electricity and dominates their skyline and employs their neighbors is not a background prop. It is the cause. It has always been the cause. The three-eyed fish was the first sign. Everything that has happened since is the same sign, written larger and larger until it fills the whole screen, and still the town stares right at it and does not see. Because the town cannot see. That is precisely the point. The plant made sure of that long ago. And it keeps making sure, every day, in the water that flows from the taps and the air that drifts from the cooling towers and the invisible patient presence of material that the residents of Springfield inhale and drink and feed to their children without ever stopping to wonder why their children have 4 fingers and the fish in the river have 3 eyes. Springfield is a town that has been poisoned. And the poisoning is so thorough, so complete, so integrated into every aspect of daily life that the people inside cannot see it. That is not a tragedy. That is a design feature. The most important, most carefully maintained feature of the whole enterprise. And the man who designed it is still up there on the hill, in his mansion, looking down at his town glowing softly in the dark. Section 3. Homer's Coma. The Dream That Never Ended. There is a theory about The Simpsons that once you encounter it, you will spend the rest of your time watching the show seeing its fingerprints on everything. It will make you look at every impossible storyline, every celebrity cameo, every reset button ending, and every dream sequence, and every moment where reality goes slightly sideways and the rules of the world bend just a little bit further than they should. You will see it all differently. And whether you ultimately believe it or not, it will have changed something about the way the show feels. The theory is this: Homer Simpson has been in a coma since April 1993. Every episode that has aired since that date is a dream. Not a metaphor for a dream. Not a stylistic convention, a literal dream. Generated by the unconscious mind of a man lying in a hospital bed at Springfield General, slowly and quietly losing himself, while the people who love him sit by his side and wait for him to open his eyes. Let us go back to the beginning of this story. The episode in question aired on April 1st, 1993. The 18th episode of Season 4. Its title was So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was deliberately ordinary. Bart, in the spirit of April Fool's Day, plays a series of increasingly elaborate pranks on Homer, escalating from minor inconveniences to something considerably more dangerous. The final prank involves Bart taking one of Homer's cans of Duff beer to an auto body shop, placing it inside an industrial paint shaker, and returning it to the refrigerator. When Homer reaches into the fridge that evening, pulls out the can and opens it, the explosion is violent enough to send him directly to the hospital. The family rushes to his bedside. Homer is dazed but alive. He lies in the hospital bed recovering. And then he sees the vending machine across the room. Homer wants a candy bar. He reaches for the machine. It tips. It falls. The full weight of a large commercial vending machine lands directly on Homer Simpson, and he flatlines. The monitors scream. The doctors rush in. And Homer Simpson enters a coma. A real one. The show is explicit about this. Not a cutaway gag, not a dream sequence, not a comedic fake-out. Homer is clinically unconscious. He is in a coma. He is gone from the world for the duration of the episode. The episode ends with Homer apparently waking up. Bart, weeping at his father's bedside, confesses everything. The prank, the beer can, all of it. He tells his unconscious father that he is sorry, that he loves him. And Homer's eyes open and he immediately reaches up and begins strangling Bart, which is so perfectly essentially Homer that the family laughs. And the audience laughs and everyone relaxes because everything is fine and Homer is back and the show goes on. And then, in the final moments of that same episode, a detail. The doctors inform the family that Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5%. Gone permanently. Destroyed during the period of unconsciousness, never to return. Homer's response to learning that he has sustained permanent brain damage is to laugh, though he says, cheerfully, that he does not know why he is laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. The episode ends and The Simpsons continues for another 32 years as if that detail were entirely unremarkable. Now, the Homer coma theory, originally proposed by a Reddit user known as Hard to Name, asks a simple question. What if Homer never woke up? What if the doctor's optimism was wrong? What if the family's relief was misplaced? What if the scene of Homer opening his eyes and strangling Bart was not a real event but the first dream? The first scene of an unconscious man's mind trying to reconstruct the world it knew before the vending machine fell? The evidence for this reading begins with something so obvious that it is easy to overlook. The tone of the show changes after this episode in a way that has been documented, discussed, and debated by fans for decades. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a specific kind of show. It was grounded. Not realistic exactly, because it was always a cartoon and always had the freedom that cartoons have, but it was rooted in recognizable human experience. The storylines were domestic. Homer tries to quit drinking and cannot. Marge feels overlooked and underappreciated. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher and is devastated when he leaves. Bart struggles with school and faces the possibility of being held back a year. These are stories about the kinds of things that happen to real families. The comedy came from the characters' responses to familiar situations, not from the situations themselves being fantastical. After the coma, everything shifts. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes a vigilante. Homer joins a secret society. Homer meets God. Homer goes to college. Homer becomes an astronaut, a food critic, a boxer, a missionary, a monorail conductor. He meets presidents. He travels to dozens of countries. He holds hundreds of different jobs across hundreds of episodes. He befriends celebrities. He survives things that would kill entire platoons of trained soldiers. The world of the show expands and expands and expands, becoming progressively more surreal, more disconnected from ordinary domestic life, more operatic and fantastical and impossible with every passing season. The internet has been debating the question of when The Simpsons quote-unquote got bad for 20 years. The coma theory answers this debate with a precision that the argument itself never had. The Simpsons did not get bad. Homer's brain got worse. What we have been watching since April 1993 is not a decline in the quality of the writing. It is a gradual degradation of the dreaming mind producing the story. As Homer's unconscious brain slowly loses function, the dreams become less coherent, less grounded, more surreal, more loosely connected to ordinary reality, more dependent on fragments of input absorbed through the hospital room where he lies, voices from a television, snatches of conversation, music from a radio, woven together by a mind that is trying desperately to keep running, to keep the story going, to keep the family together inside the dream for one more episode, one more week, one more quiet evening on Evergreen Terrace. Here is the detail that the theory cites most often as its most haunting piece of evidence. 6 months before the coma episode, in the season 4 premiere called Homer the Heretic, Homer has a conversation with God. An actual face-to-face conversation, directly and without any ambiguity in the text of the episode. God appears to Homer in a dream and they talk, man to deity, about life and faith and the nature of existence. And during this conversation, God tells Homer something. He tells Homer that he will someday learn the meaning of life. But not yet. Not today. God says Homer's time is coming, but it has not come yet. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline is not vague, it is not approximate. 6 months after God tells Homer that his time is nearly up, Homer's conscious life ends. The show presents the theological exchange as a quirky, charming gag about Homer's complicated relationship with organized religion. But under the coma theory, it is something else entirely. It is a prophecy. God was telling Homer, in the gentlest possible way, that his waking life was about to end. That what came after would be different from what came before. That the world was about to change for Homer Simpson in a way that the Homer who woke up every morning and drove to the plant and came home and sat on the couch would not be able to fully understand. Homer did not understand. Homer laughed, because that is what Homer does. He laughed and went back to sleep. And 6 months later, in the most literal possible sense, he went back to sleep for the rest of the series. The aging problem is where the coma theory distinguishes itself from every other explanation for Springfield's impossible stasis. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. We have spent some time on this already, talking about the floating timeline, talking about the way the show maintains a permanent present tense. Every theory attempts to explain this. The radiation theory says mutated cellular biology prevents normal aging. The cartoon logic explanation says this is simply a convention of long-running animated shows. The coma theory says something much simpler and much more devastating. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went unconscious in April 1993 and never came back. Of course his children do not age. His unconscious brain cannot imagine them growing up because he was not there to see it happen. He cannot dream something he has not experienced. He can only dream what he knows. And the last time he saw Bart, Bart was 10 years old and mischievous and strangling worthy in his. The last time he saw Lisa, Lisa was 8 and brilliant and sad and his. The last time he saw Maggie, Maggie was a baby who looked at him with those enormous eyes that seemed to see everything. He cannot dream them any older because he has never known them any older. The dream preserves them exactly as they were on the day the vending machine fell, because that is the only version of them his mind contains. Marge does not age because the last time he saw her, she looked exactly like she looks in every episode. His love for her is so fundamental, so woven into the structure of his unconscious mind, that she exists in the dream as a constant, a fixed point. The face he would know at any age and in any darkness. She cannot be allowed to age. Because aging means time passing, and time passing means the coma going on too long, and the coma going on too long means the possibility that nobody is sitting by his bed anymore. That the family has moved on. That the life he is dreaming about has happened without him. The celebrity appearances make sense in this framework. Later seasons of The Simpsons are absolutely saturated with celebrity guest appearances. Famous musicians, famous athletes, famous actors, famous politicians, all showing up in Springfield for reasons that range from plausible to completely inexplicable. The coma theory explains this. Homer's brain, lying in that hospital bed, is receiving ambient input from the world outside. A television in the corner of the room, conversations between nurses and doctors, music from somewhere down the hall, his family visiting, talking to him, reading news to him, hoping he can hear. His brain processes these fragments of external input and incorporates them into the dream. A name overheard. A voice recognized from a program on the television. These become characters in the dream, translated by a mind that is using whatever it has to keep the simulation running. Every celebrity who shows up in Springfield is a voice Homer heard through the fog. A face glimpsed through the static, his unconscious brain doing its best to populate the dream world with the fragments it can gather from the world he can no longer fully access. The show acknowledged this theory. In a remarkable and somewhat vertiginous moment of meta-awareness, Season 34 included something described as a deliberately leaked, fake deleted scene. In this scene, Homer wakes up from a long coma, looks around, and it becomes clear that every outlandish episode was a dream. The scene was animated. It was shown. And then the show's writer said, it was not real. A hoax. A prank. Planted by hackers. But they made it. They sat down and they wrote that scene and they animated it and they showed it to the audience. And their explanation, their insistence that Homer is not in a coma and never has been, arrived wrapped inside an episode that literally depicted Homer waking up from a coma and discovering that everything since Season 4 was a dream. They showed you the truth and called it a joke. The audience laughed. Just like Homer laughed when he was told he had permanently lost 5% of his brain. Executive producer Al John addressed the theory directly in a 2015 interview. He said it was not true. He dismissed it as fan speculation, but he did not explain why nobody ages. He did not explain the tonal shift after season 4. He did not explain why God told Homer his time was nearly up 6 months before the coma. He did not explain why the show has become progressively more disconnected from reality with each passing season, which is exactly what you would expect from a dream produced by a brain that is slowly, gently, quietly losing its grip. The theory does something that no official explanation has ever done. It makes the whole show make sense. All of it. The aging freeze. The tonal shift. The celebrity flood. The increasingly impossible plots. The reset button between episodes that erases consequences as if they never happened. The fact that Homer can survive anything, endure anything, recover from anything because his body is not actually enduring anything. His body is in a hospital bed. Only his mind is in Springfield. And his mind cannot kill him because his mind is the one telling the story. And here is the part that stays with you long after you have put the theory down and tried to go back to watching the show normally. If the coma theory is true, then the show is not a comedy. It is something else. It is a man's deepest wish, given 36 years of running time. And his deepest wish is not complicated. It is not grand. It is not ambitious. It is just this. He wants to go home. He wants Marge to still be there. He wants to sit on the couch with his kids on a Friday night and eat something bad for him and watch something stupid on television and feel, for 1 hour, completely safe. He wants the family to be intact. He wants the children to still be small enough to need him. He wants the beer to be cold and the house to be warm and the neighborhood to be exactly as familiar as it has always been. That is Homer's heaven. A house on Evergreen Terrace, where the kids are always young and the morning always comes and nobody ever has to say goodbye. And the coma gives him that. The dream sustains it. Every episode is one more night of that dream, perfectly maintained, impervious to the passage of real time. The world outside receding further and further while inside the dream, everything stays exactly as it should be. The coma theory does not ruin The Simpsons. The coma theory makes every episode an act of love. A father dreaming about his family because they are the only thing worth dreaming about. Every impossible plot, and every celebrity, and every reset that erases yesterday's catastrophe by morning. It is not lazy writing. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, if the dream finally stops, Homer has to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed, how old his children really are, whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still sitting by his bed, or worse, not waking up at all. So the dream continues, has been continuing since April 1993, and every Sunday night when the opening credits roll and the yellow family runs through the door and collapses onto the couch in perfect formation, it is not a TV show resuming for another episode. It is Homer, somewhere in the quiet dark of Springfield General, pulling his family a little closer inside the dream, keeping the loop going for one more hour, one more week, one more impossible, beautiful night in the town that only exists because he needs it to. There is a question that the coma theory invites that is almost too quiet to ask. What does Marge know? In the dream, Marge is Homer's anchor. She is the fixed point around which everything else orbits. She is patient and worried and occasionally exasperated and always, fundamentally and without condition, there. She does not leave. She does not age. She does not move on. She stays in the yellow house on Evergreen Terrace and makes dinner and worries and loves Homer with a particular quality of love that is more like weather than emotion, something atmospheric, something that is simply the condition of the air around him whenever she is present. Is that the real Marge? Or is that Homer's memory of Marge, which is its own thing, its own constructed version, shaped by what Homer needs her to be rather than what she actually is? The real Marge, the one sitting by the hospital bed in 1993, watching the monitors and talking to her unconscious husband in the hope that he can hear, is aging, is grieving, is living through something that the dream Marge never has to experience. The real Marge does not know what is happening inside Homer's head. She cannot see the dream. She sits outside it, in the real world, and waits. In the dream, Marge never waits. In the dream, Marge is always present the moment Homer needs her. There is something in that detail that is not quite comfort and not quite tragedy. It is something in between. The dream has given Homer the thing he loves most in the world, his wife's consistent presence, and made it eternal and unconditional and available at every moment, which is beautiful if you accept the dream as gift. And which is heartbreaking if you understand that the gift is a substitute for something real that is happening outside the dream, without him. In a hospital room, where time is passing at its normal rate and the real Marge is doing what real people do when someone they love is absent. She is living her life, changed by the absence, shaped by it, becoming someone that the Homer in the dream cannot know. Because the dream can only show Homer the Marge he already knew. Every episode that has aired since April 1993 is, in this reading, a love letter and a limit simultaneously. A celebration of what Homer had and a memorial for what he could not keep. The coma theory is not a satisfying answer to the mysteries of Springfield. It is something better than satisfying. It is true to the emotional experience of watching the show across a long time, the feeling that something is happening beneath the surface of the comedy. The feeling that the stakes are somehow higher than any individual episode ever fully explains. The feeling when Homer is in genuine danger or when the family is genuinely threatened, that this matters in a way that goes beyond the plot mechanics. It matters because in the dream, it is the only thing that matters, the only thing Homer is spending whatever consciousness he has left to protect. The family, the house, the street, the town that does not exist anywhere except in the mind of a man who loved his family so much that he built a whole world around them and has been living in it, quietly and without asking anything of anyone, for 30 years and counting. Section 4. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Reopening Springfield's greatest crime. It is time to revisit the greatest unsolved mystery in the history of The Simpsons, the crime that transfixed an entire country in the summer of 1995. The question that Fox promoted like a cultural event, that America's Most Wanted covered as if it were a real unsolved case, that generated a national contest with thousands of entrants and, according to the show's own creators, produced essentially no correct answers from the general public. Who shot Mr. Burns? The official answer, delivered in Season 7, Episode 1, is Maggie Simpson. Baby Maggie. The case was closed. The baby did it. Move on. Except the case was not closed. Not really. Because the evidence does not add up the way the show wants you to think it does. And the more carefully you look at what the show actually presents, as opposed to what it tells you to conclude, the more the official answer starts to feel less like a solution and more like a cover story. Let us go back to the beginning. Season 6, Episode 25. Who Shot Mr. Burns, Part 1. The summer of 1995. The setup was meticulous and the show knew it. This was not a casual mystery. This was a carefully constructed puzzle, a genuine whodunit designed with enough moving parts and red herrings and legitimate suspects to support a national conversation. Fox promoted the mystery with an official viewer contest. Submit your guess for who shot Mr. Burns, and if you were right, you might be animated into a future episode of the show. Thousands of entries. The winner would be selected from the correct guesses. Nobody won. We will come back to that. The episode establishes, with considerable care, exactly why everyone in Springfield might want Mr. Burns dead, because everyone does. Burns has spent the episode escalating his attacks on the town in ways that affect virtually every recurring character. He has stolen an oil well discovered beneath Springfield Elementary School, gutting the school's budget and eliminating programs for students. He has used his wealth to bankrupt Moe's Tavern, forcing its closure. He has created a geological sinkhole that demolished the Springfield retirement castle, leaving its elderly residents homeless. He has injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, badly enough to require veterinary attention. And for his crowning achievement, the act that pushes an entire town past the edge of endurance, he has constructed a giant disc-shaped device and used it to physically block the sun over Springfield, not metaphorically, not through pollution or atmospheric effects. He built a machine and used it to blot out the sun. The reason is pure Burns logic. If the residents of Springfield cannot access sunlight, they cannot grow their own food, generate their own solar power, or do anything that would reduce their dependence on the Springfield nuclear power plant for their electricity needs. By stealing the sun, Burns forces every man, woman, and child in town to buy their power from him. He has not merely monopolized the town's energy supply. He has monopolized the town's access to the fundamental energy source that makes all life possible. He has literally stolen the sun. When Smithers, his loyal assistant and the one person in Springfield who comes close to caring about Burns as a human being, protests this plan as going too far, Burns fires him on the spot. Smithers, who has devoted his entire existence to Burns's service, who has managed Burns's schedule and his health and his relationships and his empire for decades, is dismissed without ceremony for the crime of having a moral objection. By the end of Part 1, every person in Springfield has a specific, personal, documented motive for wanting Charles Montgomery Burns dead, or at least very seriously injured. Homer, because Burns has never once remembered his name despite Homer working at the plant for years. The humiliation of this is so complete, so systematic, so personal that it has driven Homer to a visible breaking point across multiple episodes. Bart and Lisa because their school lost its funding. Grandpa Simpson because his retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie because the school's budget cuts cost him his position. Tito Puente for the same reason. Moe because his bar was bankrupted. And Smithers, freshly fired, suddenly free of the psychological obligation to protect the man he has spent his life serving, sitting in an alcoholic haze somewhere in Springfield with every reason in the world to do something he has thought about and never done. The entire town gathers at a public meeting to confront Burns. The tension is enough to see. Multiple characters are visibly armed. The air in the room is the particular kind of heavy that precedes violence. And then Burns is shot. A single bullet. He staggers to the town sundial, collapses, his hands falling in the direction of 2 letters. Then the ambulance takes him away. The screen goes black. America waits. Here is what happens in Part 2. The investigation plays out, partially as comedy and partially as genuine procedural. Smithers confesses almost immediately, which is either the act of a guilty man or the act of a man who is so shattered by his own complicity in Burns's crimes that he confesses to the wrong one. As it turns out, Smithers was blackout drunk during the shooting and did not shoot Burns. He shot old Jasper in the wooden leg. Different victim, different location, different crime entirely. One by one, suspects are eliminated. Principal Skinner has an alibi. Mo has an alibi. Tito Puente has what may be the greatest alibi in television history, a full musical number demonstrating that he channeled his rage into composing and performing a samba. The investigation stalls until a key piece of forensic evidence is recovered. An eyelash, found on Burns's suit after the shooting. Na analysis identifies it as belonging to a Simpson. The evidence shifts to Homer. His fingerprints are on the gun. He had the most clearly articulated ongoing motive of anyone in town. Burns has never once remembered his name. Homer has been driven to the breaking point by this. He had both opportunity and motive. He is arrested. He is about to be convicted. And then Burns wakes up from his coma and identifies his shooter. It was Maggie. Baby Maggie Simpson. According to Burns, he encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle that followed, his gun fell from his holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun went off. Burns was shot. Case closed. A baby did it. Move on. Now let us look at what the show does not say out loud. The contest. Fox invited viewers across America to submit their guesses for who shot Mr. Burns. The prize was substantial. The winner would be animated into a future episode. Thousands upon thousands of entries came in, and according to the DVD commentary for the episodes, nobody from the randomly selected sample of entries had the correct answer. Not one person. The prize was ultimately awarded randomly with a cash substitute for the correct answer, because the correct answer was not found. The show's writers acknowledged on that same commentary that they were aware of exactly one person who had posted the correct answer online. On the night of the original broadcast, one person, using a college internet account, had worked it out. By the time the producers tried to find them, the account no longer existed. They issued an open invitation on the DVD release for that person to come forward. They never did. Think about what this means. The show's creators designed a mystery, told the public it was solvable from the clues in Part 1, promoted a national contest around it, and when the answer was revealed, essentially nobody in the entire country got it right. Either the clues were too subtle, the red herrings were too effective, or the answer did not actually follow from the evidence in the way the show claimed. Let us look at the clues themselves. Burns falls onto the sundial. His hands, as he collapses, come to rest pointing at two letters, W and S. The camera shows us this. From Burns's own perspective, lying on the sundial, the letters would read M and S. The show tells us this means Maggie Simpson. M for Maggie, S for Simpson. But Burns himself stated canonically and on the record that his hands pointing at those letters was not intentional. He did not deliberately position himself to spell out his attacker's initials. He just fell. The sundial clue, the single most discussed piece of physical evidence in the mystery, the image that was reproduced on merchandise and in promotional materials, and in every summary of the case, was explicitly described by the victim as a coincidence. The central clue of Springfield's greatest mystery is meaningless according to the only person it could have come from. Then there is the gun. Burns carried his gun in a holster, and shortly before the shooting, the show reveals that the holster was empty. The gun was missing from Burns's person before the attack took place. Whoever shot Mr. Burns did not bring their own weapon. They used Burns's. This is significant because it restricts the possible shooter considerably. Most of the suspects at the town meeting were depicted carrying weapons of their own. They brought them because they were angry enough to consider using them. The person who shot Burns was someone who did not bring a gun. Someone who came to the meeting without the intention of committing violence. Someone who encountered Burns's weapon by chance and used it impulsively, or perhaps not impulsively at all. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. So do at least a dozen other characters who were not depicted carrying weapons that evening. Burns's last words before being shot were, as best as can be reconstructed from his account, some version of, "Oh, it is you." He recognized his attacker. He was not surprised. He was not alarmed. He said, "It is you." The way you would greet someone you have met before and do not consider a physical threat. The tone of resigned recognition rather than the tone of fear. Does Mr. Burns recognize Maggie Simpson? Has he ever met her? Has he ever had any meaningful interaction with her that would explain why seeing her would produce a tone of quiet recognition rather than a tone of mild confusion at the presence of an infant in a parking lot? The show does not establish a relationship between Burns and Maggie before this event. Burns barely recognizes Homer, and Homer has worked directly for him for decades. The idea that Burns would look at a baby and say, in that weary, knowing way, "Oh, it is you," as if acknowledging a familiar adversary, is difficult to reconcile with what we know about how Burns processes and categorizes the people around him. In season 18, Homer mentions casually that he was actually the one who shot Mr. Burns. He says this directly, on camera. Nobody reacts. Nobody investigates. The richest man in Springfield was shot. The case was officially resolved as the work of an infant. And now Homer is apparently confessing to the crime in casual conversation, and the world moves on as if he said nothing of consequence. Either Homer is making it up for attention, which is certainly within his character, or the original verdict was wrong. The Marge theory, developed in detail by a fan analyst, makes a surprisingly strong case. Marge is a devoted mother. She watched Burns destroy her children's school, injure her family's dog, and steal the son from the town her family lives in. She had every reason. And Burns, in a previous episode, had developed a romantic infatuation with Marge. If Burns recognized Marge in that parking lot, if that was the tone of the "oh, it is you," then his choice not to name her as his attacker when he woke up makes a different kind of sense. He protected her. He took the bullet, woke up, and chose to point at the sundial rather than identify the woman who shot him. Maggie was the perfect scapegoat. Legally unchallengeable. Morally untouchable. Chief Wiggum says it himself. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie cannot be prosecuted. Maggie cannot be imprisoned. The case can be closed, Burns can decline to press charges, and the real shooter, whoever she or he is, walks away entirely. A baby is blamed for a crime she may or may not have committed, and the case is settled. The alternate endings prove that even the writers were not fully committed to the Maggie answer. A complete alternate conclusion was animated in which Smithers is revealed as the true shooter. Full length, fully voiced, fully produced. This ending was shown in a retrospective clip show hosted by Troy McClure. And when it was shown, it was dismissed by McClure with a line that is itself remarkable. He says the Smithers ending would not have worked because it would have required ignoring all the Simpson family DNA evidence, which would be, and he uses this specific word, downright nutty. The line is a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, where a jury acquitted despite substantial DNA evidence, an event that had happened only months before the episode aired. The show is winking at you. It is telling you that juries ignore DNA evidence all the time. That the official answer is not necessarily the right one. That evidence can be made to point wherever the people with the power to interpret it want it to point. The mystery was not solved. It was resolved. In Springfield, those are two very different things. And the final shot of the episode, the very last thing you see before the credits roll, is Maggie alone in the room after everyone has left. She looks carefully around. She confirms she is unobserved, and then she makes a gesture with her pacifier that mimics the act of pulling a trigger. The show presents this as a confession, a baby's knowing, self-satisfied acknowledgement of what she did. But look at it again. Really look at it. She is a baby. She witnessed something. And babies do what babies do when they witness something. They imitate it. They replay what they saw because that is how infant cognition processes experience. She is not confessing. She is remembering. She is reenacting something she watched an adult do, the way babies everywhere replay what they observe. Not because they understand what it means, but because their minds are working through it, filing it, making sense of it. Maggie did not shoot Mr. Burns. Or she did. Or Homer did. Or Marge did. The show knows. The writers know. And they have spent 30 years maintaining an answer that does not quite hold together. Because the true answer, whatever it is more complicated and more interesting than a baby with a gun in a parking lot. Springfield's greatest mystery was never solved. It was closed, and the people who closed it had very good reasons to want it closed quickly, resolved cleanly, and filed away somewhere nobody would think to look again. The baby was convenient. Convenient is not the same as true. Section 5. The Immortal Billionaire. How Mr. Burns Cheated Death. How old is Mr. Burns? This is a question the show has answered dozens of times across dozens of episodes and never answered consistently even once. His birth year shifts depending on which episode you are watching. His personal memories span historical periods that would place his age anywhere between 100 and 150 years old. He has described working relationships with historical figures who died before the First World War. He has referenced personal memories from the Gilded Age, not as things he read about in books or heard from older relatives, but as things that happened to him. He was there, he remembers. He is still here. By the most conservative estimate, Charles Montgomery Burns is well over 100 years old. By the most liberal reading of the show's established continuity, he is perhaps approaching 140, and he does not just exist at that age. He functions. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation with strategic intelligence and long-term planning capabilities that most people in their 30s cannot match. He manipulates municipal politics, orchestrates complex schemes, navigates modern finance and modern law and modern technology. His body is frail, certainly. His physical strength is essentially non-existent. A strong breeze might knock him over. But his mind is as sharp as it has always been. He is arguably the most cognitively capable character in all of Springfield, operating with a ruthless strategic clarity that none of his much younger neighbors can come close to matching. How is this possible? How does a man who was alive before the automobile, before commercial aviation, before nuclear physics was even understood as a science, end up running a nuclear power plant in what appears to be the present day, while the people around him age normally and die normally, and he simply continues? The show addresses this directly in the Springfield Files, the episode we discussed earlier in connection with the radiation theory. Burns undergoes a weekly medical regimen. It is so extreme, so saturated with chemicals and radiation therapy that it causes his entire body to emit a visible green glow for a period after each treatment. Without the treatment, Burns dies within 7 days. The regimen is not a health maintenance program. It is life support in a form that nobody else in Springfield has access to. It is the mechanism by which a man who should have died of natural causes sometime in the mid-1950s is still answering his office phone and plotting against Homer Simpson in what appears to be the 2020s. The treatment involves radiation. This is not incidental. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades, whose operation has demonstrably mutated the local fish population and plausibly affected every person living nearby, is personally dependent on controlled exposure to radiation to remain alive. Burns is not just profiting from nuclear power. He is powered by it. His biology has been so fundamentally altered by its relationship with radioactive material that normal cellular processes can no longer sustain him. He requires external input. He requires a weekly dose. Miss one and the equilibrium collapses, and everything that should have killed Burns decades ago catches up with him all at once. This connects to one of the show's most famous and most often quoted scenes. Burns visits a doctor who performs a thorough examination and delivers his findings. Burns, the doctor explains, has every disease known to medical science, every single one, simultaneously present in his body. This includes diseases that have not existed in human populations for generations. Diseases that should be mutually exclusive, that should interfere with each other's progression, that should produce symptoms so severe and so contradictory that no human body could sustain all of them at once. Burns has all of them. In perfect equilibrium, each disease canceling the others out, creating what the doctor calls a Three Stooges syndrome. Three forces of illness, each pressing equally against the other two, each prevented from progressing by the equal pressure of its neighbors. Like three people trying to get through a doorway at the same time. None of them can move. They are all stuck. Burns is the sickest man in America. He is also, paradoxically, functionally indestructible. Because everything that should kill him is being blocked by everything else that should kill him. This is played for laughs. It is one of the most quoted moments in the series. But if you apply the radiation theory to it, something interesting happens. The treatment is not curing Burns's diseases. It is managing them. It is using precisely calibrated exposure to radioactive material to maintain every illness in his body in a state of perfect stasis. Like adjusting the control rods in a nuclear reactor to prevent a meltdown. Burns's body is the reactor. His diseases are the reaction. The weekly treatment is the regulation that keeps everything from going critical. Take away the treatment and the equilibrium collapses. Everything surges forward simultaneously. And Burns, who has been kept alive through a century of careful nuclear maintenance, dies in a matter of days. Smithers is not just a loyal assistant. Smithers is a medical necessity. He manages Burns's schedule, including the weekly treatment appointments, with a vigilance that the show sometimes frames as devotion, and sometimes as obsession, and sometimes as simply the mechanical precision of someone who knows exactly what happens if he fails. Without Smithers maintaining the treatment schedule, Burns misses a dose. The balance tips. Burns dies. Smithers is not devoted to Burns out of love alone. He is devoted because his absence is a death sentence. He knows this. Burns may know this. And this knowledge is the quiet foundation beneath everything else in their relationship. The elaborate, strange, psychologically dense relationship between the ancient billionaire and his endlessly patient assistant is built, at its base, on a single practical reality. Smithers is keeping Burns alive through organizational competence. And he knows that if he ever stops, the oldest man in Springfield will simply run out of time all at once. Burns's connection to history adds another dimension to the immortality question. The show has shown or implied Burns's personal involvement in an extraordinary range of historical moments. He attended Yale. He served in some capacity during World War II, a capacity that the show strongly suggests was at best morally complicated and at worst actively villainous. He stole $1 trillion bill from the United States government during wartime. He knew Howard Hughes. He has referenced the Gilded Age and the robber baron era of American industry not as history lessons but as personal memories. He has described the early days of American capitalism with the comfortable familiarity of someone who was there, who participated, who understood the game being played because he was one of the people playing it. The Burns family fortune predates the Industrial Revolution. The Burns dynasty, as the show depicts it, is one of the oldest continuously powerful lineages in American history. Not just wealthy. The kind of wealthy that shapes nations. The kind of wealthy that builds infrastructure and then charges everyone else to access it. The kind of wealthy that exists so far above the ordinary operations of law and accountability that legal concepts become theoretical rather than practical. Burns did not build this empire. He inherited an empire that was already ancient when he came of age, and he has been extending and maintaining it ever since. Which raises a question the show gestures at without fully exploring. Is Burns unique? Or is the Burns family's history of extraordinary longevity part of a longer pattern? If the current Burns has survived to his age through artificial means, through radiation treatments and medical management, what did his predecessors use? Before nuclear technology, before modern medicine, before any of the infrastructure that currently keeps Burns alive existed, how did the Burns family maintain its continuous grip on power across so many generations? The show does not answer this, but it does establish that the Burns family has been in continuous control of their fortune for longer than most American institutions have existed. That kind of continuity does not happen through normal inheritance patterns. Something else has been happening. Something the show hints at without naming. Burns has come close to dying many times. He has been shot, hospitalized, collapsed, poisoned, abandoned in the wilderness without any of his medical infrastructure, and he has survived every time. Not through the cartoon resilience that Homer uses. Homer survives things because the story needs him to. Burns survives because he has spent a century building a system designed specifically to ensure his survival. Money that can buy the best doctors, connections that can access treatments nobody else has, infrastructure that can absorb whatever physical crisis arises and route around it, containing it, managing it, until Burns is patched up and functional and back behind his desk looking down at Springfield from the window of his office. Homer's immortality is passive. Burns's is engineered. Every dollar Burns has ever spent, every institution he has ever corrupted, every politician he has ever purchased, every doctor he has ever retained, every security system and every legal shield and every arrangement made in quiet rooms between people with too much power to be openly accountable. All of it serves, ultimately, one purpose. Keep the treatments coming. Keep the balance maintained. Keep the reactor running, because Burns is the reactor. He has been the reactor for over a century. And if the reactor stops, everything that depends on it stops too. Springfield needs Burns. This is the most uncomfortable truth in the whole arrangement. The town's economy depends on the power plant. The power plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on his treatments. His treatments depend on the infrastructure that his wealth and influence have built and maintained. It is a closed loop, a self-sustaining system where the man, the machine, and the money feed each other in an endless cycle that nobody inside the loop has any incentive to break. Springfield cannot kill Burns because Springfield cannot survive without Burns. And Burns cannot die because dying would mean his system finally having to answer for what it has done to the people living inside it. All the violation. All the contamination. All the years of leaking and poisoning and quietly making sure that the population of Springfield was never quite healthy enough. never quite sharp enough, never quite angry enough to do something about any of it. If Burns dies, all of that comes to the surface. The records become public. The violations become prosecutable. The connection between the cracked cooling towers and the yellow faces and the four fingers and the three-eyed fish becomes impossible to deny. Burns cannot die because Burns is the only thing standing between Springfield and the truth about Springfield. He is not immortal. He is something worse. He is too expensive to die, and Springfield will keep paying his bills in electricity costs and in cognitive damage and in the quiet, persistent, unacknowledged cost of living inside a contamination zone for as long as Burns keeps the lights on. There is something else worth sitting with here. Something about Burns that the show has gestured at without fully articulating. Burns is the only character in Springfield who has a complete memory, not a perfect memory, and certainly not a reliable one by any normal standard. He misremembers names, confuses decades, occasionally refers to events from the 1880s as if they happened last Tuesday. But he has a continuous narrative of his own life that stretches back over a century. He was there. He was present for things. He watched the world change in ways that nobody else in Springfield can claim to have witnessed firsthand. This makes him, in a peculiar way, the only historically grounded person in town. Everyone else exists in the floating present, with backstories that keep being revised to fit the floating timeline, origins that shift each time the show needs them to shift. Homer and Marge's past has been rewritten 4 times. The other residents exist in the context of whatever decade the current episode requires. But Burns is anchored. He has a history that the show has never fully retconned because his age is the foundation of his character. You cannot rewrite Burns's past without undermining the entire premise of who he is. Burns is Springfield's only true historian. The only person who can tell you what this place was before it was what it is now. What it looked like before the plant. Who lived here before the yellow-faced, four-fingered population that currently occupies it? What the river looked like before the three-eyed fish appeared in it. Burns was there for all of it. He watched the whole transformation. He may, if the radiation theory is right, have been the primary agent of that transformation. And he keeps the records. Somewhere in that mansion on the hill, behind the security systems and the sycophantic yes-men and the centuries of accumulated documentation, there are files that would answer every question Springfield's residents have never thought to ask. The timeline of the contamination, the original safety assessments, the early reports of unusual biological effects in the surrounding population, the evidence of what the plant was doing to Springfield before Springfield lost the cognitive capacity to notice. Burns has all of this. Burns is this. He is the archive, the memory, the witness, the man who knows everything that happened and has every reason in the world to ensure that nobody else ever finds out, which, if his treatment schedule holds, will be forever. Section 6. Maggie Simpson, the smartest person in Springfield. She does not speak. She does not walk reliably. She communicates primarily through pacifier adjustments and the occasional perfectly timed, perfectly aimed, devastating stare. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She is the least discussed Simpson. The one who appears in the fewest storylines. The one whose inner life the show explores only in glimpses, through shorts and cutaways, and the occasional episode that pulls back the curtain just far enough to show you something extraordinary, and then lets it fall shut again. She has done more than the rest of her family combined. She shot the richest man in Springfield. She led a revolutionary uprising against a tyrannical daycare caretaker. She has saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations using problem-solving abilities that no one in the family quite notices. Because she is a baby and babies are not supposed to solve problems. She was tested and found to possess intelligence levels that the show implies are difficult to even measure accurately. She was briefly the subject of a bidding war between rival private equity firms who recognized in this infant something that none of the adults around her seem capable of seeing. Let us start with the action that defines her in the public imagination. We have already spent considerable time on the question of who shot Mr. Burns. We have examined the physical evidence, questioned the sundial clue, noted Burns's recognition in his last words before the shooting, observed that his gun was already missing before the attack. We have not yet spent enough time on the aftermath. On what the shooting reveals about Maggie specifically, regardless of whether she was the one who pulled the trigger. A baby was formally identified as the person who committed a violent assault against the wealthiest man in Springfield. The police investigated. The evidence was examined. The conclusion of the official investigation was, yes, this specific infant did this specific thing, and there is nothing to be done about it because you cannot prosecute a baby. Chief Wiggum, who is not a man noted for the sharpness of his institutional insights, stumbles into a truth in his response to the Maggie verdict. He says no jury in the world would convict a baby. And then he lets it go. The case is closed. The baby is not charged. The baby goes home to Evergreen Terrace in her car seat and stares out the window, and nobody asks what she is thinking. And then the final shot of the episode shows Maggie alone in the room. She looks around carefully. She checks. Nobody is watching. And then she moves her pacifier in a gesture that mimics pulling a trigger. We talked earlier about the interpretation that she is imitating something she saw an adult do, that she is processing a witnessed event through the kind of behavioral mimicry that is natural in infants. But let us take the show's own reading seriously for a moment. Let us say she did it. Let us say Maggie Simpson, 1 year old, found a gun, aimed it, and shot a grown man at close range. What does that tell us about Maggie? It tells us that she had enough spatial awareness and fine motor control to hold and aim a firearm. It tells us that she made a decision to fire. It tells us that she waited until she was unobserved before demonstrating any acknowledgement of the act. And it tells us that she has, from the very beginning of her observed existence, understood the value of privacy, of performing her most significant actions below the radar, of being observed as a passive, helpless infant while actually operating as something quite different. The Longest Daycare is a theatrical short film released in 2012. 7 minutes. It was nominated for an Academy Award. And it is 7 minutes of Maggie Simpson demonstrating cognitive and strategic capabilities that would be extraordinary in an adult with decades of experience, deployed through the physical limitations of a 1-year-old who cannot reliably walk. The premise is simple. Maggie is dropped at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare facility run with the particular kind of authoritarian efficiency that exists in places where the people in charge have confused control with care. Inside the facility, Maggie finds a caterpillar in a chrysalis. She wants to protect it. A larger baby, a bully named Gerald, wants to destroy it. What follows is a miniature action film in which Maggie systematically outmaneuvers Gerald, the daycare staff, and the facility's physical security arrangements to save the butterfly and release it into the world. She does this in silence, without speaking a word. She does it through observation and planning and improvised problem-solving. She reads the environment. She maps the facility. She identifies threats and assets. She develops strategies that require understanding how other people will respond to specific stimuli. She executes multi-step plans that require precise timing, spatial awareness, and the ability to predict behavior. And she does all of this while being physically limited to the motor capabilities of a 1-year-old. Her body falls. Her body stumbles. Her body cannot keep pace with what her mind is doing. She crawls when she needs to run, reaches with arms that are too short, navigates a world built for people 3 times her size. And she succeeds anyway, every time, because her intelligence absorbs every physical constraint and compensates for it. Her decision-making is not just good, it is flawless. Every choice she makes in the short is correct, not approximately correct, not good given the circumstances. Correct, optimal. As if she has modeled the situation completely before acting and selected the best possible response each time. She is operating at a cognitive level that her physical development cannot support. And that gap between what her mind can do and what her body can do is one of the most quietly extraordinary things the show has ever depicted. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly. The results vary between episodes as the floating timeline demands, but the implication is always the same. Maggie is not a normal baby. In some episodes, her measured intelligence registers as extraordinary. Off the charts. Beyond what standardized instruments can reliably measure. The show presents this as a quick joke and moves on. Maggie has been established as brilliant, and then the show has gone on to another storyline, because the storyline about Maggie's genius raises questions that the show is not prepared to answer. Questions about what Maggie is planning to do with it. Questions about what she is waiting for. The theory about Maggie's silence is worth dwelling on. She lives in a family of relentlessly verbal people. Homer is never quiet except when asleep. Marge processes everything out loud, narrating her worries and her hopes in a steady, gentle stream. Bart is noise. Pure, concentrated, deliberate, joyful noise. Lisa is the most articulate 8-year-old in the history of American television, delivering arguments and counter-arguments and philosophical positions and emotional disclosures with a precision that adults struggle to match. The Simpson household is a wall of sound. Constant, overlapping, warm, and chaotic, and entirely characteristic of a family that communicates by talking over each other. And in the middle of it all, Maggie sits, watching, listening, processing, not unable to speak. She spoke once, her first word daddy, voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in a brief cameo that the show never returned to. She can speak. She chooses not to. And the theory asks why. What is the calculation that a mind like Maggie's has made about the value of silence? Look at what happens to intelligent women in this family. Lisa Simpson is brilliant. Genuinely, demonstrably, extensively brilliant. Her intelligence is her defining characteristic and the engine of almost every storyline she participates in. And what has her intelligence gotten her? Isolation. The particular loneliness of being the smartest person in a room that did not ask for a smart person. The experience of speaking and being talked over. Of fighting for recognition from a family, a school, a community that is not constituted to provide it. Lisa uses her intelligence visibly, loudly, relentlessly. She puts it on the surface where everyone can see it, and the surface response year after year, episode after episode, is to treat her intelligence as an inconvenience, as a challenge to be managed, as a quality that sets her apart from the people around her in ways that make her life harder, not easier. Maggie has watched this. Maggie has watched this from the beginning. She has observed, from her car seat and her high chair and her spot on the couch, the full arc of Lisa's experience. The brilliance and the isolation and the arguments and the occasional tiny victory and the much more frequent defeats. She has seen what happens when you are visibly intelligent in Springfield. And she has made a different calculation. Silence is protection. Invisibility is armor. The less they notice you, the more you can accomplish. The less they expect from you, the freer you are to act. Think about every remarkable thing Maggie has done, every crisis averted, every danger navigated, every moment where she has intervened and changed the outcome of a situation that the adults around her were handling badly or not handling at all. In every single case, the action happens below the radar. Nobody sees it coming. Nobody attributes it to Maggie afterward, or if they do, they attribute it to luck or coincidence rather than to the deliberate, planned intelligence of a 1-year-old who is playing the longest, quietest long game in Springfield. She has been playing it for 36 years. She has been watching and listening and processing and waiting. She has maintained the most effective possible cover. She performs being exactly what everyone expects a baby to be: passive, helpless, dependent, innocent. She performs it flawlessly, which is itself a performance that requires extraordinary intelligence and control. Because real babies are not passive and quiet in the strategic way Maggie is. Real babies make noise. They demand. They cry and fuss and reach for things and fail and try again. Maggie performs the quietness of a baby who has decided that quiet is her best strategy, and she performs it so well that for 36 years, nobody who matters has looked closely enough to see what is actually happening behind those enormous, patient eyes. Connect this to the radiation theory. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations, and if those mutations affect different people differently, then Maggie and Homer represent opposite ends of a spectrum. Homer's biology was altered by radiation in a direction that reduced his cognitive function while amplifying his physical resilience. He became, in biological terms, harder to kill but less capable of thinking. Maggie's biology was altered in the opposite direction. Her cognitive function was amplified to levels that the show implies are genuinely extraordinary. Perhaps unprecedented. Where Homer's brain was diminished, Maggie's was supercharged. Same environmental cause. Same family. Same water, same air, same contaminated food chain. But opposite outcomes, as if the radiation, moving through the same family's genetics, produced a spectrum of effects that ranged from intellectual devastation at one end to intellectual amplification at the other. Homer is what happens when the mutation takes something away. Maggie is what happens when it gives something impossible. And then the coma reading, which is the most emotionally resonant of all the theories about Maggie. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode since April 1993 is the product of an unconscious mind maintaining a simulation of the family he left behind, then Maggie's genius is something specific. It is Homer's prayer for his youngest child. He cannot watch her grow. He cannot see her develop. He cannot hear her first sentences or watch her learn to walk steadily or know what kind of person she becomes. He cannot be there for any of it. So in the dream, in the only version of Maggie that his unconscious mind can construct, he makes her extraordinary. He gives her an intelligence that transcends her developmental stage. He makes her capable of things that no real baby could do, because in the place where he is, in the darkness and the quiet of the hospital room, he needs to believe that Maggie will be okay. That she will be more than okay. That even without him there to protect her, she will be equipped for the world in ways that go beyond anything he could have provided. Her genius is not a mutation. In the coma reading, it is a father's prayer. The only gift he can give her from where he is. The only protection he can offer. Make her extraordinary. Make her the kind of person who can handle anything. Make her so capable and so aware and so prepared that the world cannot surprise her, cannot overwhelm her, cannot touch her in any way that matters. And back in the waking version of Springfield, if there is a waking version, the most unsettling reading of Maggie is the simplest one. She is waiting. She is 36 years into a very long wait. She has absorbed more information about Springfield and its residents and its power structures and its injustices than any other person in town, because she has been doing nothing but observing and processing for her entire existence. She knows things that nobody suspects she knows. She sees things that nobody suspects she sees. She is keeping notes in some internal archive that nobody else can access, building a picture of this town and its workings that is more complete, more accurate, and more damning than anything Lisa has ever managed to put together through her active, visible, relentlessly fought for research. And she has not acted yet. Not in any sustained, declared way. The shooting, the daycare rebellion, the interventions and the small heroics. These are gestures, indicators, evidence that the capacity is there. But they are not the thing itself. Whatever Maggie Simpson is ultimately building toward, the show has never revealed it. Her endgame remains the last truly unsolved mystery of the Simpson family. Because unlike every other character in Springfield, Maggie has never told us what she wants. She has never showed her hand. She has never for a single moment stepped out from behind the pacifier and the baby stare and said, clearly, here is who I am, and here is what I am going to do. 36 years of silence. 36 years of watching and waiting and processing, while the family rushes around her and the town burns and resets and burns again, and Maggie sits in the middle of it all, not missing a thing, not giving anything away. She is the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace. She just has not decided what to do about it yet, and maybe that is the most remarkable thing about Maggie Simpson. Not what she has done, but what she has chosen not to do, when the evidence strongly suggests that she could do quite a lot indeed. Section 7. Mona Simpson. The Mother, the Fugitive, the Conspiracy. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the story. That was the official version. Abe Simpson told Homer, when Homer was young, that his mother had passed away. There was a grave. Homer mourned. He grew up believing he was a boy whose mother had died before he was old enough to really know her, and whose father was too emotionally closed off to fill the space she had left. That grief, that specific and particular kind of grief that attaches to a mother who was lost before the relationship could develop, shaped Homer completely. His desperate need for approval, his terrified clinginess toward Marge, his constant anxiety that she will leave, his inability to tolerate being alone, his compulsive need to be liked by everyone around him, his willingness to accept humiliation and neglect from an employer who cannot remember his name rather than risk the destabilization of the one stable relationship in his life. His sense that there is something fundamentally wrong with him, something that makes people go away. All of this is grief. The grief of a small boy who woke up one morning and his mother was gone. In Season 7, the show revealed that the grief was built on a lie. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired on November 19, 1995. Here is what happens. Homer fakes his own death to get out of working on a Saturday morning. It is a classic Homer solution to a mundane problem. He pushes a dummy off a cliff near the power plant, lets the town believe he is dead for a few days, and enjoys the freedom of non-existence. When Marge insists he go to the Hall of Records and correct the official death notice, Homer goes. And while he is there, doing the bureaucratic paperwork to confirm that he is in fact still alive, he notices something that changes his understanding of his entire life. According to the municipal records of Springfield, Homer's mother is alive. She did not die. The grave Abe showed him was not her grave. It was the grave of Walt Whitman. The poet, Abe Simpson, for reasons the episode eventually explains but never fully excuses, spent Homer's entire childhood and adolescence and adult life pointing to a famous dead writer's headstone and telling his son that this was where his mother was buried. Homer goes looking. He finds Mona at the cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She thinks Homer is dead. She is visiting because she does not know yet that the dummy off the cliff was a prank and not a casualty. When Homer proves who he is, they reunite beside the headstone of a 19th century poet in a moment that is quietly one of the most devastating things the show has ever produced. A grown man and his mother, separated for 27 years, finding each other in a cemetery in the only American town that does not appear on any map. And then Mona tells Homer the truth. She left because she had to. Because staying would have put Homer and Abe in danger. Because the man who owned the power plant, the man whose name was on Homer's paycheck for his entire adult working life, had ruined her existence and forced her underground before Homer was old enough to remember her face. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife. She was married to Abe. She had a young son named Homer. She was ordinary. The world outside Springfield was burning through the civil rights movement, the counterculture, the protests and the sit-ins and the marches and the long, complicated, sometimes violent process of a society arguing with itself about what it was supposed to be. And something in that argument reached Mona Simpson in her quiet Springfield life. Something changed. Mona was radicalized. She joined a group. The show depicts them as hippies, flower children, peace activists from the gentler end of the 1960s political spectrum. But it also makes clear that their cause was not just aesthetic or cultural. They had a specific target, a specific facility, a specific crime they had decided to act against. Burns owned a biological weapons laboratory. Not just a nuclear power plant, a germ warfare facility, a laboratory designed to develop and produce weapons-grade biological agents. In Springfield, in the same town where Homer was growing up, in the same town where families lived and children played, and nobody had any idea that the richest man in town, the man whose cooling towers you could see from the school playground, was also cooking diseases in a lab somewhere in the industrial district. Mona and her group broke into the lab. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological agent stored inside. During the chaos of the raid, Mona paused to help someone who had been knocked down in the confusion. That someone was Burns. She stopped to help the man whose weapon she had just destroyed. She helped him up. And Burns looked at her face and recognized it. He called the authorities. He gave her name and her description to the FBI. And from that moment, Mona Simpson became a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not call. She could not write. She could not be in any fixed location long enough to be found. She kissed Homer goodbye one night while he was sleeping, a goodbye he did not know was happening, and she disappeared into the underground network of people living off the grid to escape exactly this kind of institutional pursuit. She was gone for 27 years. Homer woke up and his mother was not there. Abe told him she was dead. And Homer spent the next 3 decades believing that there was something wrong with him. That he was the kind of son a mother would rather die than remain present for. When Mona comes back to Springfield in season 7, Burns spots her almost immediately. He sees her through a cab window, recognizes her, and calls the FBI. She has to run again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time. This time knowing why she is leaving. This time knowing who made her leave. And Homer does not connect the dots. This is the most important thing. Homer knows. He knows that Mr. Burns ran a biological weapons program. He knows that Mr. Burns had his mother identified to federal authorities, destroying her ability to be part of his life. He knows that the man whose power plant he drives to every morning, the man who has never once remembered his name, the man who keeps him employed as an intentional act of strategic incompetence management, is the man who took his mother away from him when he was 6 years old. He knows all of this. And he goes back to work. He does not quit. He does not confront Burns. He does not do anything with the knowledge that would seem to follow naturally from having it. He absorbs it, the way Homer absorbs everything, through whatever passes for his emotional processing apparatus, and he keeps driving to the plant. The theory argues that this is not surprising once you understand the full picture. Burns did not just destroy Mona's life, he engineered Homer's. By forcing Mona underground when Homer was a small child, by ensuring that Homer grew up without a mother, without the emotional security that a present and loving mother provides, Burns created precisely the kind of adult worker that his plant required. An emotionally damaged man who desperately needs the stability of his job, a man whose terror of abandonment is so deep that he would endure almost any indignity, any humiliation, any unsafe condition, rather than risk losing the one external structure that tells him he is needed. A man who will never organize a union, never lead a safety inspection campaign, never look up at the cooling towers and ask the questions that a healthy, secure, confident adult would ask. Homer works at the power plant not because he lacks the intelligence or capability to find better employment. He works there because he was broken as a child in a specific and targeted way that makes the plant the only place he feels anchored. And the conspiracy goes deeper still. The show reveals in a later season that Burns and Grandpa Simpson had a deal. Burns had committed a crime. Abe discovered it. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed that Homer would have a job at the plant for as long as he wanted it, no matter what. No matter how many mistakes he made, no matter how many violations he failed to prevent, no matter how many times his performance would, in any normally functioning workplace, have resulted in immediate termination. The deal protected Homer's employment absolutely. 742 documented errors. And Homer was never let go. Because the deal that his father made with the man who destroyed his family was still in effect. Abe bought Homer's job security with silence about a crime. And Homer has been sitting in that job security ever since, never knowing it was purchased, never knowing the price that was paid for it, never knowing that the reason the richest man in town keeps him on the payroll is not nepotism or forgetfulness, but a binding arrangement made in secret between his father and the man who stole his mother. Three generations of Simpsons, all shaped by a single grudge. Burns' grudge against Mona, who destroyed his weapons. The grudge that drove her underground and broke Homer's childhood and made Abe desperate enough to make a deal with the source of his family's destruction. 3 generations, each one a domino falling against the next, all set in motion by one night in 1969, when a woman stopped to help someone who was down, and that someone was Charles Montgomery Burns. Mona died in a later season. The episode is quiet and devastating. Homer sits with her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew slip away for the last time. The show does not use the moment for comedy. It does not cut away. It stays in the room. It lets the weight of 27 stolen years press down on the scene until you feel them. The years that should have been there and were not. The childhood that could have been different. The man Homer might have become if Burns had not reached for that telephone. That man exists. Homer without the crayon. Homer, as revealed in the episode where the foreign object is briefly removed from his brain, is articulate and perceptive and capable and clear. He sees things as they are. He understands the architecture of his own situation. He is, in that brief window, the man he was supposed to be before all of it happened. Before the crayon and the radiation and the motherless years and the job at the plant and the compulsive fog of self-medication and comfort eating and television. Homer chose to put the crayon back. He could not stand being smart in Springfield. Being smart meant seeing Springfield clearly, and seeing Springfield clearly was unbearable. So he chose the fog. But consider what it means that the choice was available at all. The crayon could be removed. Homer's intelligence could be restored. The damage was not, in the narrow surgical sense, permanent. There was a version of Homer accessible through a relatively straightforward medical procedure, a version that was present and capable and awake to the world, and Homer experienced that version for a brief time and found it so painful that he went back to the hospital and asked them to restore the impairment. What did he see in those clear days that was so unbearable? The show implies it was the sadness of Springfield. The poverty and the pollution and the futility and the way that intelligence, when applied clearly to the situation of being Homer Simpson in Springfield, produces nothing but a comprehensive understanding of how little can be done. Smart Homer understood his world too well to be happy in it. He saw the architecture of his own life, its foundations laid by someone else's malice, its walls reinforced by decades of chemical damage, its windows looking out onto a town that had already decided not to know what it knew. And the clarity was not liberating. It was devastating. So he went back into the fog. And the fog is warm. The fog is Homer's natural habitat. In the fog, the plant is just where you work. Burns is just your boss. The cooling towers are just part of the skyline. The three-eyed fish is just something you mention sometimes. In the fog, everything is fine. In the fog, you can come home and sit on the couch and be happy in the particular uncomplicated way that Homer is happy, with a beer and a television and a family that is there when you need them. The fog is Burns's greatest achievement. Not the plant, not the empire, not the 100 and more years of survival. The fog. The fog is the masterwork. But the choice was never free. The fog was there before the choice. The crayon was in his brain before he knew it was a choice. The radiation had been in the water before he knew there was anything wrong with the water. The deal was in place before he knew there was a deal. The whole apparatus of Burns's influence over the Simpson family was operating before Homer was old enough to understand what apparatus meant. Burns did not just take Homer's mother. He took the future that Homer would have had with her. He took the man Homer would have been. He took the potential that existed in that house on Evergreen Terrace, in the smart and loving woman who kissed her sleeping son goodbye in the dark of a 1969 Springfield night and ran. Because staying meant giving Burns something worse to take. Springfield is a comedy. It has always been a comedy, but underneath the comedy, underneath the gags and the slapstick and the couch gags and the 36 years of Homer falling down and getting up again, there is a story about a family that was systematically dismantled by one man's vindictiveness and one town's complicity. Mona fought back and lost everything. Abe made a deal with the person who had destroyed his family and buried the truth. Homer inherited the wreckage and never understood why his life felt so heavy. And Burns won. Burns always wins. Because in Springfield, the man with the money writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson will work at the nuclear power plant until he dies. Because the deal is in place, because the contamination is ongoing, because the fog is always there, reliable and comfortable, ready to receive Homer at the end of every hard day and make the connections he cannot make disappear back into the static where they live. Homer's mother is dead now. The real Mona. Not the fake Mona of the Walt Whitman headstone, but the actual woman who was there and then gone and then there briefly again and then gone for the last time. She is gone. Homer sat with her at the end. He held her hand. And then he went back to work. Because in Springfield, that is what you do. You go back to work. The cooling towers keep steaming, the plant keeps humming, the fog keeps rolling in, and the man who took your mother keeps sitting in his office on the hill, looking down at the town he owns, perfectly balanced, perfectly maintained, glowing softly in the dark. Section 8. The Simpsons predictions. Prophecy, coincidence, or something darker. Let us talk about the predictions. You know the ones. You have seen them on social media, in clickbait articles, in breathless YouTube compilations and Facebook posts shared by people who are not regular Simpsons viewers, but who encountered one specific image from one specific episode and felt the particular chill that comes from seeing the future. Apparently written into a past that did not know it was writing it, The Simpsons predicted Donald Trump's presidency 16 years before it happened. The Simpsons predicted the Disney acquisition of Fox years before it occurred. The Simpsons predicted smartwatches, commercial space tourism, video calling, autocorrect failures, and a Cypress Hill performance with the London Symphony Orchestra. The Simpsons predicted a flu pandemic originating in Asia. And then, when real events unfolded in 2020, the internet went back to the show's 1993 pandemic episode and found details that seemed to align with the COVID-19 situation in ways that were difficult to entirely explain away. How are they doing this? That is the question that follows the clips around. How does a cartoon sitcom from 1989 keep being right about things that have not happened yet? Are the writers time travelers? Is there a conspiracy? Is The Simpsons some kind of encoded prophetic text, a Nostradamus, for the cable television age? Let us go through the major ones slowly, not to debunk them or to validate them, but to look at them carefully and understand what they actually represent. The Trump prediction. In the year 2000, an episode called Bart to the Future depicted a possible future in which Lisa Simpson has become the first female president of the United States. In establishing the context of her presidency, a character mentions that the country is dealing with a budget surplus left behind by her predecessor. Her predecessor, it is explicitly stated, was Donald Trump. The episode aired in March 2000. Trump won the 2016 election 16 years later. This one is genuine. The show named Trump specifically. It depicted him as a past president, implying he had won and served and left office before Lisa's fictional administration. The internet responded to Trump's actual win into 2016 by pulling this episode out and sharing it widely. And the response was a mixture of amazement and unease that genuinely crossed demographic lines. People who had not thought about The Simpsons in years were suddenly confronting the image of a show from 2000 that had seen something coming that most political analysts in 2015 were treating as a joke. The Disney Fox prediction. In a 1998 episode, the show depicts a scenario in which 20th Century Fox has been acquired by a larger entertainment conglomerate. The show made this joke because, well, the show was produced by 20th Century Fox. And making meta-jokes about corporate ownership was exactly the kind of thing the Simpsons writers enjoyed. It was satire about media consolidation, which was already a visible trend in 1998. In 2019, Disney completed its acquisition of most of Fox's entertainment assets, including the studio that produces The Simpsons. The show that predicted it became the thing that was predicted, which is a level of recursive irony that even Springfield would appreciate. The Cypress Hill collaboration. In a 1996 episode called Homerpalooza, there is a joke in which the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally books the London Symphony Orchestra while under the influence of recreational substances. The two groups end up sharing a bill at a music festival to comedic effect. In 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. 28 years between the joke and the reality. The pandemic episode. In 1993, an episode called Marge in Chains depicted a flu virus originating in Japan spreading to Springfield, causing panic buying, community breakdown, and a frantic search for a cure. During the chaos, the town accidentally releases a swarm of hornets. In 2020, a flu virus originating in Asia caused global panic buying, community breakdown, and a frantic global search for a cure. And during the early months of that pandemic, media outlets began reporting on Asian giant hornets appearing in the United States, which were immediately nicknamed murder hornets. The details align in ways that feel like more than coincidence. And yet, executive producer Al Jean, when asked about the predictions, gives an answer that is blunt and considered and deserves to be taken seriously. His explanation is, if you throw enough darts, you are going to hit some bullseyes. That is it. That is the official position. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, references, observations, satirical extrapolations. When you generate that much content over that long a period, some of it is going to align with future events through the operation of statistical probability alone. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its best seasons, put it even more plainly. There are very few cases where The Simpsons predicted something. It is mainly coincidence because the episodes are so old that history repeats itself. And fact-checking organizations that have examined the prediction claims systematically find that most of them fall into a few categories. Things that were already visible trends when the episodes were written, extrapolated forward. Things that seem more specific than they actually are because our memory rounds the details up. Things where the show's enormous output creates a lot of chances for coincidental alignment, and we remember the hits while forgetting the misses. The writing staff is relevant here. The Simpsons has historically employed one of the most educated writing rooms in the history of television. Multiple writers hold degrees from Harvard, Yale, and other research universities. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, science, computer engineering, political theory, economics. These are not people pulling random ideas out of the air. They are highly educated observers of American culture and American institutions who spend their professional lives studying trends, analyzing patterns, and pushing current trajectories to their logical and absurd conclusions. They did not predict Trump's presidency. They observed that Trump had been publicly flirting with political ambition since the late 1980s, that celebrity politics was becoming an increasingly normalized part of American electoral culture, and they wrote a joke about the logical endpoint of that trajectory. They were not predicting the future. They were describing the present more accurately than most people were doing, and then asking where it went next. They did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. They observed that media consolidation was accelerating, that large entertainment conglomerates were systematically acquiring smaller ones, and they made a joke about what that looked like at its logical extreme. The joke came true because the trend came true. The show described the present. The present became the future. This explains most of the predictions, not all of them. Some of the coincidences are specific enough to resist the statistical explanation comfortably. The Trump escalator sequence. Not only did the show name Trump, but it depicted a visual of him descending a moving staircase in an announcement-style context that echoes with uncomfortable precision the moment Trump descended the escalator at Trump Tower in June 2015 to announce his candidacy. The show did not just name him. It drew a specific visual scene that appears in the real event 16 years later. How much of that is coincidence? Where does the attribution of significance shade into confirmation bias? The Siegfried and Roy episode presents a similar challenge. The show did not merely make a joke about a Las Vegas magic act with exotic animals. It depicted a specific scenario in which a white tiger attacks one of the performers. In 2003, Roy Horn of Siegfried and Roy was critically injured when one of the act's trained white tigers attacked him during a performance. The details are too aligned to feel entirely like coincidence, and yet the explanation of coincidence, of a show with a long run producing enough content that some of it must align with future events, remains technically adequate. Here is where the meta-theory becomes interesting, the one that reframes all of this in a way that is more compelling than either pure coincidence or impossible prophecy. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes the future. Not through any mechanism beyond the normal operations of cultural influence, but through exactly that mechanism, which turns out to be more powerful than most people appreciate. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most referenced pieces of American media in the history of the medium. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its images and phrases and characters have become so deeply embedded in American cultural consciousness that they function as a kind of collective vocabulary. When the show makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream at a time when the idea is still hypothetical and politically marginal. It becomes a reference point. It becomes something that millions of people use to process the idea, to make it feel familiar, to make it feel imaginable. The joke does not predict that Trump will become president. The joke makes a Trump presidency feel less like an impossible absurdity and more like an inevitable punchline. It primes the cultural imagination for the outcome. When the outcome arrives, when reality catches up to the joke, it does not feel like prophecy. It feels like recognition. Of course this happened. The Simpsons already did this. We already saw it. We already had the reference. And that feeling of recognition of having been here before is not because the show predicted the future. It is because the show prepared us for the future. The satire did not forecast. It normalized. It took a trajectory that was already in motion and presented it as accomplished fact, years before the fact was accomplished, and by doing so it made the fact feel less shocking when it arrived. Springfield does not reflect America. America has become Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years, and we stared into it so long that we started to resemble what we saw. The nuclear plant on the edge of town. The billionaire whose monopoly over the local economy gives him effective control over every institution. The incompetent government. The population too distracted and too cognitively exhausted to notice how badly they are being exploited. The cycle of catastrophe and reset. The collective amnesia. The same mistakes repeating. Springfield is not a prediction of where America was heading. Springfield was always a diagnosis of where America already was. The show just wrote it down first. And when reality caught up to the diagnosis, people called it prophecy. There is one more piece to this. The Simpsons has also produced thousands of predictions that did not come true. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies that never materialized. Political outcomes that went the other way. Cultural shifts that were anticipated and never arrived, social predictions that were wrong in interesting ways and right in others. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody makes viral compilation videos of the times The Simpsons got it wrong. Confirmation bias works in one direction only. We remember the hits. We forget, actively forget, the misses. Because the misses do not fit the story we are telling about the show. When you produce 800 episodes containing thousands of satirical observations about the trajectory of American culture, and then filter those observations through the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever constructed, which is the internet combined with human memory, you end up with a highlight reel that looks like prophecy. Every failure quietly deleted, every success amplified and shared and contextualized until it glows with apparent significance. The predictions are not supernatural. They are the natural result of a brilliantly written show staffed by highly educated observers of American life, running for an impossibly long time, producing more satirical content than any comparable show in television history, and then having that content processed by a global audience that selectively remembers what confirms the story it wants to tell. The Simpsons did not write the future. The Simpsons wrote so many possible futures that some of them were bound to arrive. And the ones that arrived are the only ones that anyone still remembers. The rest dissolved quietly into the static of decades and seasons and forgotten episodes, leaving nothing behind but the bullseyes. An archive of hits that looks, from a distance, like a prophet's notebook. Try telling that to the internet, though, the next time a clip from 1998 lines up perfectly with a headline from 2026. Because even knowing how the trick works, even understanding the statistics and the confirmation bias and the volume effect, it is still impressive to watch. 800 episodes. 36 years. An unknowable number of satirical darts thrown at the broad target of American culture. And enough of them landing to make even the writers pause sometimes and wonder if they know something they should not. Section 9. Springfield's Secret Geography, the town that exists everywhere. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people can name Springfield than can name the capital of half the states in the actual country. It has a nuclear power plant, a tire fire, a gorge, a harbor, a monorail, an elementary school, 2 hospitals, a prison, a quickie mart, a pub, a town hall, a police station, and a retirement castle. It has mountains within a reasonable drive. It has ocean access. It has desert landscape visible in certain episodes and Arctic weather in others. It borders, depending on which episode you are watching, Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, none of which share a border with each other in actual geography. It is everywhere. It is nowhere. It is specifically, deliberately, systematically impossible to locate. The show has been teasing its own geography for its entire run. Every time a clue appears that seems to narrow the location down, another clue appears in a different episode that contradicts it completely. Lisa's area code is a Missouri code. The abbreviation seen in certain episodes is ENT, which does not correspond to any American state. The capital, reached by telephone in one episode, is identified as being in a state beginning with a vowel. When Homer calls the state capital, the voice on the other end is one that narrows the options without fully resolving them. The show gives you a piece of the puzzle and then, in the next episode, gives you a piece that does not fit with it at all. Matt Groening spoke about this publicly in 2012. In an interview with Smithsonian Magazine, he acknowledged that he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, where he grew up. He said he chose the name Springfield because it is one of the most common city names in America, appearing in almost every state, and because he wanted the town to feel like it could be anywhere. He wanted every American watching to be able to look at Springfield and see something of their own town in it. For approximately 48 hours after this interview, the mystery appeared to be solved. Springfield was in Oregon. Case closed. Confirmed by the creator himself. Move on. Except the show immediately continued contradicting this. Episodes produced after the interview placed Springfield in geographic context inconsistent with Oregon's climate, topography, and regional relationships. The writers did not honor the confession. The mystery persisted, deliberately, because the show had long since decided that Springfield's location was more valuable as an open question than as an established fact. The mystery was the point. The ambiguity was the design. This works as a simple cultural observation. Springfield is meant to be universal. A town that belongs to everyone who watches it. A place that resonates because it looks and feels like something familiar from wherever you grew up, not because it is specifically mapped to a real location. The geographic impossibility is the show's way of saying to every viewer, this is your town, not anyone else's. Yours. But there is a stranger reading. One that connects Springfield's geographic impossibility to everything else we have been exploring tonight. If the radiation theory is right, if the plant has been altering biology and chemistry and the physical properties of the Springfield environment for decades, why should geography be exempt? If a person can grow up in Springfield and develop physical characteristics that do not exist in normal human populations, why should the land around them be constrained by normal cartographic logic? Maybe Springfield has both mountains and ocean because the contamination does not just affect biology. Maybe something in the plant's emissions, something beyond conventional radioactive material, has warped the space around Springfield in ways that compress geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible region. The physics of Springfield, like the biology of its residents, have been altered by whatever the plant has been releasing into the environment for 3 decades. If the coma theory is right, Springfield's geography becomes even easier to explain. Homer's unconscious brain does not have a precise, accurate map of America stored in its memory. It has impressions, it has fragments, it has the emotional residue of every place he has ever visited or seen on a screen or heard described. Mountains from a family vacation remembered in its broad emotional outlines. The smell of ocean from a trip remembered partly and wrongly. The particular flatness of Midwestern farmland seen through a car window. These fragments get assembled by a dreaming mind that is not concerned with cartographic accuracy. Dreams do not have geographic logic. Dreams have emotional logic. Springfield feels like America because it is made from Homer's memory of America, which is scattered and incomplete and held together by feeling rather than facts. If the collective denial theory from the principal in the Popper episode is right, Springfield's refusal to have a fixed location is the ultimate expression of the town's fundamental operating principle. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find. You cannot bring federal charges against a nuclear power plant if its jurisdiction keeps changing. You cannot hold anyone accountable for anything if the regulatory authority is perpetually undefined. Springfield floats between states because floating is legally safer than landing. Landing means accountability. Landing means someone shows up with a clipboard and a badge and starts asking about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the bone fragments in the basement. The show made this explicit in a season 12 episode called Behind the Laughter, a mockumentary format episode that presented the Simpson family as a real television family from a real location. In the original broadcast of that episode, they are identified as being from northern Kentucky. In the syndicated rerun version, that identification was changed to a different state entirely. The canonical location of Springfield literally depends on which transmission of which episode you happen to have watched. Even when Springfield has a definitive answer, that answer is not definitive. It mutates. It refuses to settle. It behaves, in this regard, exactly like the population that lives inside it. Every state has been theorized as Springfield's home. Every theory has evidence for it and evidence against it. The debates are conducted with genuine intensity in fan communities, websites, subreddits, comment sections, as if the location of a fictional town in a cartoon were a genuinely important unresolved question. And in a sense it is. Not because knowing Springfield's location would resolve anything, but because the search for it is the search for something else. It is the search for the thing that makes Springfield feel real. The desire to locate it, to pin it down on a map, to say this is where this place is and I could go there if I wanted to, is the desire that the show has been cultivating and frustrating in equal measure for 36 years. Springfield will never be located. The show decided this a long time ago. And the decision was not a failure of the writers to commit to a geography. It was a precise, deliberate choice to make Springfield belong to everyone by belonging definitively to no one. A town with a fixed location is a local story. A town with no fixed location is a national one. Springfield is everywhere in America. It is the town with the power plant and the corrupt billionaire and the underfunded school and the good family doing their imperfect best. It is the town that forgets its disasters and re-elects its failures and drinks its water without testing it. It is the town that loves its children and cannot protect them from the things it has done to the environment they grow up in. It is the town where the same debates happen every generation and the same power structures persist, and the same people end up holding the levers, and the same people end up getting held under the water. You cannot find Springfield on a map, because Springfield is not on a map. Springfield is in the gap between what America says it is and what America actually does. It lives in that space. That is where it has always lived. That is why it feels familiar to everyone who watches it, regardless of where they actually grew up. Because the gap is everywhere. Because the gap is the country. And Springfield is the town that was built in it. Section 10. The supporting characters' dark secrets. Ned, Hans, Skinner, and the town behind the town. Before we visit the outer edges of Springfield, let us take a moment to appreciate what makes this town so remarkable as a fictional construct. Most long-running shows struggle to populate their world convincingly beyond the main cast. The peripheral characters feel thin, functional, present because a scene needs someone to react. Springfield is the opposite. Its supporting cast is one of the most fully realized in the history of American television. These are people who have been developed over decades, who carry their own histories and their own wounds, who illuminate aspects of Springfield's darkness that the Simpson family, standing at the center of it, cannot fully see. When you look at the supporting characters of Springfield carefully, you start to understand that the show has been running two stories simultaneously for 36 years. The foreground story is the Simpsons, their family dynamics, their adventures and misadventures and improbable encounters. The background story is Springfield itself, what it does to the people who live in it, what it requires of them, what it takes from them, what it leaves them with. The supporting characters are the evidence for that second story. They are what Springfield produces when you are not Homer Simpson. When you do not have the absurd physical resilience of a man who has been inadvertently adapted by radiation. When you do not have the strategic intelligence of a baby who learned to hide what she knew. When you are just a person living in a contaminated town run by an immortal billionaire, trying to get through a day that keeps offering you reasons to break. We have spent most of tonight talking about the Simpsons themselves, the family at the center of Springfield's gravity. But Springfield is not just a family. It is a town full of people who have their own histories, their own mysteries, their own quietly devastating backstories that the show has seeded across decades of episodes without ever fully resolving them. Let us walk through the outer rings of Springfield tonight. Let us visit the people who live in the margins of the story and find out what they are holding. We begin with Hans Moleman. You know Hans Moleman. Everyone knows Hans Moleman. He is tiny. He is ancient. He is nearly blind, navigating the world through glasses so thick that they might as well be blindfolds. He appears in the background of Springfield scenes and exists essentially to suffer. He gets hit by cars. He gets crushed by falling objects. He gets buried alive, mauled by animals, struck by lightning, incinerated in various contexts. He falls into pits. He is consumed by escalators. He walks into traffic with the serene confidence of a man who has already died so many times that traffic has lost its power to concern him. The show has killed Hans Moleman in canonical, non-dream, non-holiday special episodes dozens of times. And then in the next episode, he is back. Completely intact, ready to be killed again. No explanation. No resurrection scene. No acknowledgement that anything unusual has occurred. He simply continues, cycling through death and return like a man for whom death is no longer a permanent address, but rather a frequent day trip. Most people accept this as a running gag. Moleman dies. It is funny. Do not think about it. But there is one detail about Hans Moleman that, once you encounter it, makes it very difficult to accept the gag at face value. In one episode, Moleman states his age. He says he is 31 years old. 31. Look at Hans Moleman. He appears to be somewhere between 80 and 95 years old. His skin is the texture of a document that has been through several floods. His posture suggests a relationship with the concept of standing upright that has grown strained and somewhat theoretical. He navigates the world with the shuffling caution of someone who has discovered, through extensive personal experience, that the world presents a lot of physical obstacles at height levels that used to not concern him. If Hans Moleman is telling the truth about his age, and there is no reason within the show's narrative to conclude that he is lying about something so specific in such a casual context, then something has aged him catastrophically. Something took a man who was 31 and turned him into someone who looks 90 in the span of what should have been an ordinary adult life. The radiation theory has the most available answer. Hans Moleman lives in Springfield. He has been living in Springfield for his entire life. He drinks the Springfield water. He breathes the Springfield air. He lives under the shadow of the same cracked cooling towers that everyone else does. But perhaps the contamination has hit him harder than it has hit others. Perhaps his particular biology, his specific genetic response to whatever the plant has been releasing, has expressed itself not as a mutation toward physical resilience or cognitive enhancement, but as accelerated biological degradation. While Homer has become nearly indestructible and Maggie has become extraordinarily intelligent, Moleman has become extraordinarily old. His 31-year-old body aged 4 decades in what felt like a few years. The radiation took something from him that it cannot give back. And it also made him very hard to kill, which is its own kind of cruelty. He ages rapidly. He is fragile. He is continuously placed in harm's way by a world that does not seem to notice or care much about his presence. And he cannot die in any permanent sense. He comes back. Every time. The radiation that aged him also, apparently, altered his relationship with death in ways that keep resetting him to operational after each fatal incident. Hans Moleman is not a running gag. Hans Moleman is Springfield's most extreme radiation case. A man who was aged out of his own life by contamination and then denied even the release of a permanent death by the same biology that took his youth from him. Springfield has agreed not to notice. The collective denial is so complete that a man who dies and comes back dozens of times in a small town where everyone knows everyone is simply accepted as a background feature of community life. Nobody investigates. Nobody asks how he keeps surviving. Nobody asks why a 31-year-old looks like a very elderly tortoise. The agreement to not ask is so deep and so total that it absorbs even the most obviously anomalous things, and files them away under the category of just how things are around here. Now let us walk next door to Homer. Let us visit Ned Flanders. Ned Flanders is the character that the show has quietly, patiently, across 36 years, destroyed more thoroughly than any other, and it has done so while presenting his destruction as the opposite of what it actually is. The show presents Ned as blessed, as a man of faith whose faith sustains him, as a positive presence in Springfield's often difficult and sometimes dark civic landscape, as the good neighbor, the kind man, the patient man, the man who turns the other cheek so reliably that Springfield has essentially stopped considering what the other cheek might feel like when it is the only face you have. On the surface, Ned has everything. He is kind, generous, physically fit, financially responsible, a devoted father, a sincere and practicing Christian. He is by any objective measure a better person than Homer Simpson in virtually every conceivable way. He volunteers. He tithes. He calls his children by names that are gentle and slightly unusual, in a way that suggests enormous love if limited imagination. He has been Homer's neighbor for 36 years, and he has managed, through what must be heroic and continuous effort, to maintain a position of active goodwill toward a man who has made his life difficult in ways that range from annoying to genuinely catastrophic, and the show punishes him for it. Relentlessly, consistently, without mercy and without remorse. Maud Flanders, Ned's wife and the mother of Rod and Todd, was killed in a freak accident at the Springfield Speedway. A T-shirt cannon, the kind used to excite stadium crowds, misfired. The shirts it was loaded with were intended for the crowd. Instead, they struck Maud, knocking her off the bleachers. She died from the fall. The cannon misfired because Homer, sitting nearby, had been loudly attempting to catch free T-shirts and had positioned himself in the cannon's trajectory. His reflexive dodge when the cannon fired sent the shirts into Maud's path rather than Homer's. Homer's selfishness did not cause Maud's death with intent, but his selfishness was the mechanical cause of it, his particular quality of self-centeredness. The way he moves through the world with complete and unconscious prioritization of his own comfort and safety resulted in his neighbor's wife being struck and killed. And Ned forgave him. Because that is what Ned does. The episode where Ned finally breaks is one of the most quietly disturbing things the show has ever produced. A hurricane destroys Ned's house. The community, led by Homer, rallies to rebuild it. The rebuilding is incompetent. Spectacularly, enthusiastically incompetent. The house they construct is the result of good intentions applied through complete absence of skill or care. When Ned arrives to see the completed structure, it collapses immediately. The wall literally falls as he looks at it. And in that moment, standing in front of the rubble of his life, Ned snaps. He screams. He insults everyone around him, including Homer, including the congregation of his church, including Reverend Lovejoy. He says things he has been holding for years. He says them with the particular violence of someone who has been compressing them under enormous pressure for an enormously long time, and has reached the point where the compression simply fails. And then he is committed. He is institutionalized. The Ned Flanders, who appears to be Springfield's most stable, most positive, most reliably kind community member, is placed in a mental health facility because the forces that were keeping him stable have failed and the person underneath is not the person anyone expected. And in the facility, the origin of Ned's personality is revealed. He was not always this person. He was a violent, uncontrollable child. His parents, well-meaning beatnik intellectuals who had conscientious objections to discipline, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years using behavioral modification techniques to remove the aggression from him. The show uses the word beating. The doctor beat the bad behavior out of him through therapy. What the doctor produced was not a naturally kind person. It was a psychologically re-engineered person whose capacity for anger and aggression had been so thoroughly suppressed and rerouted that it could no longer express itself normally. Ned's kindness is not character. It is conditioning. It is the result of a childhood intervention that created a man who literally cannot feel and express anger in the normal way that human beings feel and express anger. This recontextualizes everything about Ned. His patience with Homer is not saintly tolerance. It is a psychological compulsion. He cannot do otherwise. His brain was trained through sustained behavioral conditioning to route the anger that arises when Homer destroys his property or kills his wife in an absurd accident and convert it into something that looks like grace. The grace is real in the sense that it is genuinely expressed. But it is not chosen. It is mechanical. It is the output of a system that was installed in Ned as a child without his consent. His faith is not spiritual certainty. It is a coping framework. A man who cannot express anger, who cannot set limits on how much he will absorb before responding, who has been conditioned to keep receiving whatever the world delivers without the normal defense mechanisms that anger provides, needs something outside himself to explain why the suffering is acceptable. Faith provides that. God has a plan. There is a purpose to this. The hurricane destroyed my house, and my neighbor built me a useless replacement, and my wife is dead, and my children are growing up without their mother, and the rich man on the hill has been poisoning my water for decades. And none of this is meaningless, because there is a plan. I believe in the plan. The plan will explain it eventually. The plan does not explain it. The show makes this explicit in one of its most quietly pointed moments. God talks to Homer. Homer has actual, direct, canonical, face-to-face conversations with God across multiple episodes. God appears to Homer. God gives Homer advice. God tells Homer things. Homer is the recipient of direct divine communication on more than one occasion, and he responds to this privilege with his characteristic mixture of gratitude, confusion, and immediate failure to apply anything he has learned. God does not talk to Ned, the man who goes to church every Sunday, the man who tithes and volunteers and reads scripture and prays with his children and has organized his entire life around the sincere, earnest, daily practice of his faith. God gives this man silence. While giving the drunk who falls asleep during sermons direct consultations and personal guidance. The drunk gets God's attention. The devout man gets nothing. This is not an accident of storytelling. The show returns to it. It draws attention to it. The gap between Ned's sincere practice and Homer's cheerful irreverence, and the radically different quality of divine attention they receive, is a thesis statement. The world of Springfield does not reward goodness. It does not protect kindness. It does not respond to faith with favor. The system, whether it is Burns's empire or the radiation or the coma dream or some combination of all three, is not designed to recognize moral behavior. It is designed to reward compliance. And Homer, who complies without thinking, who never challenges anything because he lacks the cognitive capacity to see what there is to challenge, receives the system's most consistent reward. Everything works out for Homer, not because Homer deserves it. Because Homer is exactly the kind of person the system was built to sustain. Ned does everything right and gets nothing. Homer does everything wrong and gets everything. They live next door to each other. The gap between them has not closed in 36 years because the gap is structural. The gap is the point. The gap is what the town is built on. Now let us talk about Principal Skinner, because Skinner contains a mystery that goes beyond what any of the other secondary characters have to offer. Skinner's mystery is not about what he did or what was done to him. His mystery is about who he actually is. The episode is called The Principal and the Pauper, Season 9, Episode 2, and it remains one of the most divisive installments in the show's entire history. Fans who love The Simpsons often name this episode when asked to identify the moment things went wrong. Critics of the show's later seasons point to it as evidence of the writer's willingness to discard established character in service of short-term story. The backlash was immediate and sustained and has never fully subsided. Harry Shearer, who provides Skinner's voice, publicly stated his displeasure with the storyline. Reviews at the time were brutal, but here is what the episode actually reveals, and what the outcry tends to obscure. Springfield Elementary holds an event to celebrate Principal Skinner's 20 years of service. During the celebration, a stranger arrives. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner. The real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was believed to have died in combat after being captured as a prisoner of war. He survived. He escaped. He came home to find that someone else had been living his life. The man Springfield has known for 20 years as Principal Skinner is not Seymour Skinner. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a petty criminal, a street kid with no future and no prospects. He was drafted. He served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian traveled to Springfield to deliver the news to Skinner's mother, Agnes. Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son, and Tamzarian, who had never had a family, who had never had an identity worth keeping, who had been a nobody from nowhere his entire life, simply became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the history, the mother, and the identity. He moved into the life that Skinner had vacated and stayed there for 20 years, building a career and a community reputation on a foundation of pure, sustained fiction. When the real Skinner walks through the door, the fiction collapses. The truth is exposed. The whole town knows. Every person in Springfield who has interacted with their principal for 2 decades, who has trusted him, who has sent their children to his school, now knows that the man they trusted is not who he claimed to be. Springfield holds a vote. And the vote is not about justice or accountability or what happens now. The vote is about whether to acknowledge the truth at all. And the result is unanimous. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree, confirming that Tamzarian is the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner is physically expelled from town, tied to a railroad car, removed from the community he came home to after surviving a prisoner of war camp. And the judge declares it explicitly illegal to mention the truth under penalty of unspecified consequences. Fans hate this episode because it destroys a character they have spent years caring about. If Skinner is Tamzarian, then every Skinner storyline, every Skinner relationship, every Skinner moment across 9 years of episodes is built on a fiction. His military background is borrowed. His relationship with Agnes is a performance sustained beyond the point where it could be corrected without catastrophic consequences. His personality, the anxious overachiever, the man perpetually terrified of his own mother, the administrator who has dreams that were never quite achieved and standards that are never quite met. All of it grew from a lie that started as a kindness and became a prison. The fans are right that the episode destroys the character. But the character was built on exactly this kind of destruction from the start. Skinner was always a man whose identity was a performance. His military service was real, but it was not his. His name was not his. His mother was not his. The whole structure of his life was borrowed and sustained through collective agreement. The agreement of Agnes, who preferred the lie to the grief of knowing her real son was gone. The agreement of Springfield, which had grown comfortable with the version of Seymour Skinner that Tamzarian had built, and did not want to update its understanding. And when the real Skinner shows up, Springfield's response is not to do the difficult right thing. Springfield's response is to protect the comfortable fiction, to make truth criminal, to exile the living evidence that the official version is wrong. This is what Springfield does. This is the mechanism that underlies everything we have been discussing tonight. The radiation, and the coma, and the immortal billionaire, and the baby who shot someone, and the man who glows in the dark. All of it persists because Springfield has a social contract, an unspoken agreement. We will not acknowledge what threatens the comfortable version of reality. We will not ask questions that have uncomfortable answers. We will not, under any circumstances, permit the truth to displace the story we have been telling ourselves. The principal and the pauper showed you that contract in writing. It showed you the vote. It showed you the legal decree. It showed you the man tied to a railroad car, the last honest witness expelled from the community for the crime of being who he said he was. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe or ignores a contradiction or resets to normal after something world-changing has happened, it happens quietly. Off-screen, the viewer is just expected to accept that everything is back to normal and not ask why. The Principal and the Pauper is the single episode where the show let you watch the mechanism operating in real time. Let you see the vote, hear the verdict, watch the exile. Let you understand that the reset is not accidental. It is chosen. It is collective. It is enforced. Springfield does not forget because its residents are damaged. Springfield forgets because forgetting is a decision, a democratic decision, made every time a disaster occurs and the community gathers implicitly and agrees that acknowledging it fully would cost more than the benefit of the truth is worth. If they acknowledged the dome, they would have to think about the pollution. If they thought about the pollution, they would have to confront the plant. If they confronted the plant, they would have to challenge Burns. If they challenged Burns, the economy would fail. If the economy failed, the town would die. So they forget. They vote to forget. They make forgetting the law. And anyone who remembers too much, anyone who shows up with evidence that the official story is wrong, gets tied to a train and sent somewhere that is not Springfield. The real Seymour Skinner is out there somewhere. Still alive, presumably, a war hero who survived captivity and came home and got put on a railroad car for the crime of having a name. The last honest man in a town that made honesty illegal. And Armin Tamzarian is still running Springfield Elementary. Still telling Agnes good morning, still calling himself Seymour Skinner, in a voice that has been doing it for so long that it no longer feels like performance. The lie has become him. The performance has become the person. And Springfield cannot tell the difference anymore, because Springfield voted not to look. Section 11. The Floating Timeline. Why nobody in Springfield is allowed to grow up. We have talked around this idea all night. It has come up in almost every section we have explored, as a symptom of the radiation theory, as the central mechanism of the coma theory, as the logical consequence of Springfield's collective denial. But it deserves its own space. its own slow, careful examination. Because the floating timeline is not just a production convenience or a storytelling quirk. It is the show's thesis statement, and it contains, in its refusal to let time pass, the most honest thing The Simpsons has ever said about what it means to love something so much that you cannot allow it to change. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons debuted in December 1989. He is 10 years old now. He will be 10 years old in every future episode that the show produces for as long as it continues to air. He will always be 10. He will always be the kid with the slingshot and the skateboard and the relentless, creative, affectionate misbehavior. He will always be the kid who is in trouble and does not particularly mind being in trouble because trouble, for Bart, is the medium through which he expresses his love for the world around him. Even his pranks are a form of engagement. Even his worst behavior is the behavior of a child who cares deeply about the reactions he produces in the people around him. And he will never be 11. He will never be 12. He will never be the teenager who is also still a child in the uncomfortable in-between way of early adolescence. He will never be the young adult who has to figure out what to do with everything he learned from his family. He will never be the person he would have become if 36 years had been allowed to pass inside Springfield the way they passed outside of it. This is strange if you think about it in human terms. We spend enormous energy as people who love children trying to help them grow, trying to give them what they need to become capable of navigating a world that does not always care about them. We worry about their development. We celebrate their milestones. We notice with a complicated mixture of pride and grief when they stop needing us in specific ways because they have learned to need themselves in those ways instead. Growing up is the goal. Even when it is hard, even when it means things changing in ways that are not always comfortable. Springfield refuses this. Springfield has looked at its children and decided, collectively and permanently, that they will not be allowed to grow. And the show's explanation for this, the official production rationale, is simply that animated shows work this way. The floating timeline is a genre convention. Most people accept it, but The Simpsons has been running long enough that the consequences of the floating timeline have accumulated into something that feels less like a convention and more like a statement. The show has imagined its characters as adults. It has done this deliberately, in specific episodes with real emotional intelligence and care. The Season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding depicts a fully realized future version of Lisa, 23 years old, engaged to be married, living a life that is recognizably her life extended forward. The episode is specific and emotionally rich. It knows who Lisa becomes. It can imagine it clearly. It depicts her future with confidence and care. And then at the end of the episode, it sends her back. Lisa returns to being 8 years old. The future closes. The glimpse through the window was exactly that, a glimpse, with the window shutting firmly behind it. The show can imagine its characters growing up. It refuses to let them. And this refusal is not casual or thoughtless. It is purposeful. It is maintained across decades of production decisions and storytelling choices and institutional momentum. Every season, the show could decide to age the characters. It has never done so. Every writer who has worked on the show could have pushed for this change. None of them have succeeded in making it happen. The refusal is total and sustained and, when you look at the scale of it, actually remarkable. 36 years of actively choosing not to let children grow up. Why? The radiation theory says, because their biology was altered at the cellular level by nuclear contamination. They cannot age in the normal way because their cellular structure was changed before they had the chance to begin the normal aging process. They are frozen, not because the story requires it, but because the environment made them that way. The coma theory says, because they exist in the mind of a man who went unconscious before he could see them grow. Homer's brain cannot imagine older versions of his children because he never experienced older versions of his children. The only Bart he knows is 10-year-old Bart. The only Lisa he knows is 8-year-old Lisa. He cannot dream them any older. He can only preserve them in the form they had on the last day he was conscious. The collective denial theory says because Springfield voted not to allow it, because the town, operating through its unspoken social contract, decided that the children would remain the children and the adults would remain the adults, and nothing would be permitted to progress from the configuration that felt comfortable and familiar and non-threatening. The same vote that exiled the real Skinner and criminalized truth applies to the passage of time. The town voted against time, and time, in Springfield, lost. But there is a fourth explanation. One that is not a theory about Springfield at all. One that is a theory about us. We have not let them grow up. The audience. The viewers. The people who have been watching since the beginning, and the people who discovered the show later, and the people who have watched it only in reruns, and the people who have never watched it but know the characters anyway because The Simpsons are as embedded in American cultural consciousness as anything that has ever been produced for television. We have not let them grow up because we needed them to stay exactly as they are. We needed Homer to always be middle-aged and confused and loving and failing. We needed Marge to always be patient and worried and fundamentally the emotional anchor of the family. We needed Bart to always be 10 and chaotic and alive in that particular way that 10-year-olds are alive, fully inside every moment without the adult capacity for ironic distance. We needed Lisa to always be 8 and brilliant and lonely and fighting for something she cannot fully name yet. We needed Maggie to always be a baby, watching everything, saying nothing, being the version of ourselves we keep hidden. The silent, observant, intelligent self that watches from behind a pacifier and waits. We needed the family because the family is something we cannot afford to lose. Not this specific fictional family, but what they represent, the chaotic, impossible, loving, frustrating, indestructible idea of a family that survives everything, that resets every Sunday night, that sits on the same couch in the same house and faces the same television with the same mixture of inattention and unexpected tenderness. The family that does not always get things right, but that is always still there. Still together. Still trying. Still at the end of every episode, intact. That is what we cannot afford to let change. Not Bart or Lisa specifically, but what Bart and Lisa at 10 and 8 represent. The children being young. The parents still being needed. The family still being the unit it was when we first saw it on a couch in 1989. We pressed pause on that image. We have been keeping it pressed for 36 years, and the show, which understood this about its audience before the audience fully understood it about itself, has honored that need. Every season that does not age the characters is the show saying, we know you need this to stay. We know you cannot let go yet. The family is still here. The couch is still here. Come back next Sunday. Everything will be the same. The Simpsons are frozen in time because we froze them there. We are the ones who built the loop. We are the ones who keep it running. Every time we watch, every time we recommend an episode to someone who has not seen it, every time we quote a line from 30 years ago like it is new because inside the show it is still new, we tighten the loop. We make the freeze a little more permanent. We make the family a little more ours. And in return, the family stays. Bart stays 10. Lisa stays 8. Homer comes home from the plant at 5:30, and the door opens and the family is there. The house is warm. The dinner is either edible or a disaster, but either way, Marge made it. The children are young enough to still be in the house. Nothing has been lost yet. No one has grown up and moved away. No one has aged out of the version of themselves that we love. The family is exactly as we left it, exactly as we need it. That is the floating timeline. That is what it means. Not a production decision. Not a genre convention. A love story between a show and its audience that has been running quietly for 36 years, maintained by the mutual agreement that some things are too important to allow to end. Let us slow down now. Let us sit with everything we have been through tonight. We have walked through Springfield in the dark. We have seen the nuclear plant and understood what it means. We have followed Homer into the dream that may have been his home since 1993. We have reopened the Burns shooting and found that the official answer has more holes in it than the story can fully contain. We have traced Burns's impossible lifespan back through a century of radiation management and strategic immortality. We have watched Maggie watch everything, patient and brilliant and waiting. We have followed Mona Simpson's trail from housewife to fugitive to the quiet hospital room where her son finally held her hand. We have examined the predictions and understood them as cultural influence rather than prophecy. We have looked for Springfield on a map and found it everywhere and nowhere, and we have walked the outer edges of the town, visiting Ned and his conditioning and Hans and his endless return from death, and Skinner and the life he borrowed so long ago that it became his own. All of these stories are different. All of them use different evidence and different logic and different assumptions about what The Simpsons is and what it has been doing for 36 years, but all of them arrive at the same place. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something structural. Something that goes deeper than animation conventions or episodic storytelling. Whether it is the radiation or the dream or the denial or the billionaire's maintenance of his own survival at the expense of everything and everyone around him, something has broken the rules of normal reality in this town. And the show has been telling us about it for decades. Not through dramatic revelations. Through accumulation, through the slow, patient layering of detail upon detail upon detail until the picture becomes undeniable. The Simpsons is not hiding its mysteries. It is showing them to you every week. The yellow skin, the 4 fingers, the 3-eyed fish, the man who glows in the dark, the baby who shot the billionaire, the principal who is not who he says he is, the mother who was gone. The town that forgets, the family that never ages. It is all there. It has always been there. The show just relies on you doing what Springfield does. Normalizing it. Accepting it. Filing it under just how things are. But tonight, you were not doing that. Tonight you were awake in Springfield in the gentlest, quietest way, following the threads, looking at the evidence, asking the questions that the characters cannot ask because the town will not let them. And now it is getting late. Springfield is quiet at this hour. The Quickie Mart is open, but empty. The lights at the power plant blink their slow, patient rhythm against the dark. Evergreen Terrace is still, every window dark. The Simpson house sitting at the end of the row with its particular yellow house familiarity that 36 years have made impossible to separate from the feeling of coming home to something you love. Somewhere in there, Homer is asleep on the couch. Maybe he is dreaming. Maybe the dreaming is what this all is. Maybe somewhere in Springfield General there is a hospital room where a man has been asleep since 1993, and inside his head the town hums and turns, and his family stays exactly as they were on the last day he saw them. Young and warm and his, preserved in the amber of an unconscious mind that, Refuses, absolutely refuses to let the story end. Or maybe Springfield is just a town. A contaminated, impossible, collectively amnesiac, geographically absurd, biologically improbable town full of people who are trying their best under conditions that have been stacked against them since before they were born. A town that loves its children even while it poisons them, that tells its stories even while it suppresses the ones that hurt. That shows you everything you need to know about itself and then looks at you calmly and waits to see what you will do with what you have been shown. What will you do? The loop keeps turning. The opening credits keep rolling. The couch gag keeps playing. The same family runs through the door and sits in the same configuration, on the same couch, in the same house, in the same town that has not changed in 36 years. And Homer looks at the camera for just a moment before the television absorbs his attention and the story resumes. What is he looking at? What does he see? Maybe he sees you. Maybe the dream knows it has an audience. Maybe somewhere in the depths of the coma, in the part of the dreaming mind that is still aware, Homer Simpson knows that you are out there. Watching. Paying attention. Asking the questions his town will not ask. And maybe, just maybe, that is why he keeps the story going. Not just for Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie. For you too. For everyone who ever sat in the dark and watched the Yellow family and felt, in some way they could not quite explain, that this was a story about them. This was Springfield. These were its secrets. Sleep well. The town will be here when you come back. It always is. That is the whole point. Thank you for spending 3 hours in Springfield with us. If you made it all the way here, you have done something genuinely impressive. Leave a comment with your time and your location. And if you want more of this, subscribe. There are more towns worth exploring in the dark, more stories worth telling slowly, more mysteries worth following wherever they go. Rest well. Springfield will be here tomorrow, exactly as it always was.